The stagecoach lurched to a stop, kicking up a cloud of dust that settled like judgment over Copper Hollow's main street. Clara Whitlock stepped down onto soil that didn't want her, clutching a canvas bag that held everything she owned. 34 years old, widowed 6 months, and flat broke. She'd taken a job cooking for ranch hands who'd probably spit at her feet if they knew the rumors following her west. But rumors didn't scare her anymore. Loss did that to a person. It burned away the parts that flinched. She straightened her shoulders, ignored the stares from the mercantile porch, and started walking toward the edge of town where Ridgeback Ranch sat, like a broken promise against the hills. This wasn't about starting over. This was about not dying. And if that meant walking straight into a fire she couldn't see yet, well, she'd done worse. If you're ready to see how far grit and courage can take a woman who refuses to break, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The dirt road leading to Ridgeback Ranch stretched longer than Clara expected. Heat shimmered off the packed earth, and her boots, good leather ones, now cracked along the seams, raised small puffs with each step. The bag's strap dug into her shoulder. She shifted it, kept walking. Behind her, Copper Hollow faded into the haze. Population maybe 300, if you counted generously. One main street, a handful of side roads, buildings that leaned like drunks propping each other up. The kind of town where everyone knew your business before you knew it yourself. She'd felt their eyes when she'd climbed down from the coach. 2 women outside the general store had stopped mid-conversation. A man sweeping the boardwalk had paused, broom forgotten. The driver had handed down her bag without meeting her gaze, like whatever followed her might be catching. Let them look. Clara had stopped caring about eyes on her back around the same time she'd stopped sleeping through the night. The ranch appeared gradually. First the fence line, weathered posts connected by sagging wire, then the barn, its roof patched with mismatched wood. The main house sat squat and practical, no decoration except a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Functional. Built by someone who didn't waste effort on beauty. 3 men worked near the corral. They stopped when they saw her, tools lowering. One said something she couldn't hear. Another laughed, not kindly. Clara walked through the gate. No one had bothered to close it, and crossed the yard. Chickens scattered from her path, clucking complaints. Help you? The speaker was young, maybe 20, with a sunburned neck and a hat that had seen better decades. His tone wasn't helpful. I'm the new cook. Mr. Hale expecting me. You're the... He cut himself off, glanced at his companions. Hale didn't mention... He mentioned he needed someone who could turn beans into something worth eating? Clara set her bag down. Her shoulder ached. Because that's what you're getting. Kitchen's that way. The second man jerked his thumb toward a low building set apart from the main house. But I'd check with Hale first. He's in the barn. Clara picked up her bag. Appreciate it. She could feel them watching as she headed for the barn. Heard one mutter something about another mouth to feed. Another responded with something cruder. She kept walking. Men like that, you didn't win them over with words. You won them over by showing up every day and doing the work they couldn't. The barn was dark after the glare outside, and it took her eyes a moment to adjust. Somewhere in the back, metal clinked against metal. The smell of hay and horse sweat and old wood wrapped around her, familiar in a way that made her chest tight. Her father's barn had smelled like this, before the farm failed, before everything failed. Mr. Hale! The clinking stopped. Footsteps. Then a man emerged from a stall, leading a gray mare. He was tall. Most men were, next to Clara, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago. 40, maybe. Hard to tell with men who worked outside. Could have been 35 or 50. You're early. His voice matched his face. Flat, careful. Stage made good time. He studied her for a beat too long. Clara was used to that look. Men trying to reconcile the widow they'd heard about with the woman standing in front of them. She wasn't sure what they expected. Someone softer, probably. Someone who apologized for taking up space. You know anything about cooking for ranch hands? I know they'll eat near anything if it's hot, and there's enough of it. She met his eyes, didn't let hers drop first. I can do better than that, but hot and plentiful is where we start. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite approval, but close. Kitchen's in rough shape. Last cook left 2 weeks ago. Nobody's been maintaining it. I've worked with worse. Have you? Not a question. He tied the mare to a post, wiped his hands on his pants. 25 a month. Room in the cookhouse. Breakfast by 5, dinner by 7. Lunch you can leave out cold. Men take it with them. Sundays you get the afternoon. Any problems with the crew? You tell me. Clara nodded. Fair enough. You'll hear things about me, about this place. Most of it's not true. Some of it is. Either way, it's not your concern. You cook, they work, everyone gets paid. Simple. Simple's good. He looked at her again, and this time there was something in his face she couldn't read. Wariness, maybe. Or recognition of someone else who'd learned to keep their guard up. Tommy'll show you where everything is. That's the kid out front, the mouthy one. Don't let him get under your skin. Don't plan on it. Ethan Hale nodded once, then turned back to the mare like Clara had already left. Dismissed, but not unkindly. Just done talking. She found her way back outside, blinking against the sun. The 3 men were still there, pretending not to watch. Tommy, the young one, broke off from the group when she approached. Boss says you're staying. Looks like. He walked her towards the cookhouse without enthusiasm. It was a long, low building with a stone chimney at one end and windows that probably hadn't been washed since they were installed. Inside, the temperature dropped 10 degrees, which would have been pleasant if the place didn't smell like something had died in the pantry. Clara set her bag on the one chair that didn't look like it would collapse. The kitchen was worse than she'd expected. Grease coated the stovetop thick enough to scrape. Dishes sat stacked in a basin, crusty with old food. The floor had a layer of grime that had probably been building for months. Mice had gotten into the flour sacks. She could see the holes. Last cook wasn't much for cleaning. Tommy leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. I can see that. You think you can handle it? Clara turned to face him. He was trying to look tough, cocky, but underneath it he was just a kid testing boundaries. She'd dealt with worse. I think if you're standing in my kitchen, you're either here to help or here to leave. Which is it? His smirk faltered. Didn't mean, yes, you did, and that's fine. You don't know me. I don't know you, but here's what's true. I'm going to clean this place. I'm going to cook food that doesn't taste like boot leather, and I'm going to do it whether you like me or not. So you can keep testing me, or you can tell me where the well is and save us both some time. Tommy blinked. Then, slowly, something like respect crossed his face. Well's out back. Pump's touchy. You gotta work the handle twice before it catches. Appreciated. He nodded, pushed off the doorframe. At the threshold, he paused. For what it's worth, Hale don't hire people he doesn't think can do the job. So, guess you'll be all right. Then he was gone, and Clara was alone with the wreckage of a kitchen and the beginning of a headache. She rolled up her sleeves. By nightfall, she'd made enough progress to see the shape of what the kitchen could be. The stove was scrubbed, the dishes washed and stacked, the floor swept twice and mopped once. She'd thrown out the ruined flour, set mousetraps, opened all the windows to air the place out. Her back ached, her hands were raw, but the space was starting to breathe again. She found a cot in the back room, small space, barely big enough for the bed and a trunk, but it had a door that closed and a window that looked out over the hills. That was more than she'd had in the boarding house back east, where the walls were thin and the landlady's questions were thick. Clara unpacked her bag. 2 dresses, both practical. A shawl. Underthings. A small leather journal her husband had given her the first year they were married, pages mostly empty because she'd never known what to write. A photograph of her parents, edges worn soft from handling. And at the bottom, wrapped in a cloth, a bone-handled knife that had been her father's. She set it on the trunk, let her fingers rest on it for a moment. You'd hate this place, she said quietly. Her father had been a farmer, suspicious of ranchers and the men who worked them. But he'd also been a man who understood hard work, and maybe that would have been enough. Maybe. She lay down on the cot without bothering to undress. Through the window, stars were coming out, the kind of sky you only got when there was nothing between you and forever. She could hear voices from the bunkhouse, low and rough. Laughter. Someone tuning a mouth harp, hitting the same note over and over. Tomorrow, she'd cook her first breakfast. They'd judge her on it, decide if she was worth keeping or just another mistake Hale made. She needed to sleep, but sleep felt like something that happened to other people. People whose husbands hadn't died in factory fires. People who hadn't spent 6 months watching their savings drain away while lawyers picked over the remains. Clara closed her eyes anyway, listened to the wind, and eventually somewhere between the mouth harp and her own thoughts, she drifted. 4:30 came early and dark. Clara woke to the sound of roosters and the distant clang of the bunkhouse bell. She dressed, splashed water on her face from the basin she'd filled the night before, and got to work. The stove took 20 minutes to heat properly. While it did, she mixed biscuit dough, sliced salt pork, cracked 3 dozen eggs into a bowl. The rhythm of it settled her. Cooking was something she knew how to do, had done since she was tall enough to reach the counter, her mother's hands guiding hers, shaping dough, testing heat. The memory was so clear, it hurt. By the time boots hit the porch outside, she had biscuits coming out of the oven, pork sizzling in the pan, eggs scrambled with a bit of wild onion she'd found growing near the pump, coffee boiling strong and dark. The men filed in without ceremony. 8 of them, not counting Hale. They took seats at the long table, hats off, mostly silent. Morning people or just uncertain about her, Clara couldn't tell yet. She started setting out plates. Biscuits, pork, eggs, a jar of preserves someone had left in the pantry. The men watched, forks hovering. "It's food," she said, "not poison. Eat." Tommy grinned. Someone else snorted. Then they started eating, and the room filled with the sounds of men who'd been hungry. Clara poured coffee, refilled the biscuit basket, kept the eggs coming. Hale came in last, moved to the end of the table like he always sat there. He didn't look at her, just loaded his plate and ate with the same careful focus he'd shown in the barn. "This is good." One of the older hands, gray-bearded and missing a tooth, spoke around a mouthful of biscuit. "Real good." "Better than good," another agreed. "Hell, I forgot food could taste like this."
"Language," Hale said quietly. Then, to Clara, "It's fine work." "Fine. Not great, not excellent. Fine."
But from a man like Ethan Hale, fine probably meant something. Clara nodded, refilled his coffee without asking. They cleared out by 5:30, heading to whatever work waited in the pre-dawn gray. Tommy lingered, helped stack plates without being asked. "Told you Hale knows what he's doing," he said. "You tell him that, or just me? Don't got to tell him, he already knows." Tommy grinned. "But you did good. They'll be easier now." "Easier how?" "They'll stop wondering when you're gonna quit." Clara looked at the pile of dishes, the grease to scrape, the floor to sweep again. "I'm not gonna quit." "Yeah." Tommy headed for the door. "I know." The days fell into a pattern. Up before dawn, breakfast for the crew, clean the kitchen, prep for dinner. In between, she worked on the cookhouse itself, patched a hole in the roof, replaced broken window glass, scrubbed corners that probably hadn't seen a brush in years. The work was endless, but it was hers, and that made it bearable. The men started to thaw. Not all at once, but gradually. They said good morning, asked her how she slept, brought her things they found, a chipped bowl that still had use, a sack of cornmeal from town, wildflowers in a tin can because someone thought the kitchen looked too bare. But the town was different. When Clara went in for supplies, once a week, usually Saturdays, people watched. Conversation stopped when she passed. The mercantile owner's wife served her politely but coldly, counting out change like Clara might pocket extra. "Don't mind them," Tommy said one Saturday, loading sacks of flour into the wagon. "Town's got nothing better to do than gossip." "What are they saying?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably. "Stupid stuff that that Hale hired you for reasons that ain't about cooking." Clara's jaw tightened. "And what do you think?" "I think Hale hired you because the last 3 cooks couldn't boil water without burning it, and you showed up able to do the job. But they don't care about that. They see a woman, alone, working for a man, alone, and they make up stories. Let them." "Yeah, but..." Tommy hesitated. "Just be careful. Town's got influence. If they decide they don't like you, they can make things hard." Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. "They can try." 3 weeks in, one of the hands, a quiet man named Boone, came back from checking fence lines with a gash across his forearm, blood soaking through his sleeve. "Wire snapped," he said, face pale. "Caught me good." The other men started talking at once, but Clara cut through. "Get him inside. Someone fetch boiled water and clean cloth. They moved without question, muscle memory from other injuries on other days. Clara had Boone sit, peeled back his sleeve. The cut was deep, ugly, but clean. She worked fast, washed it, pressed cloth against it until the bleeding slowed, then stitched it closed with thread from her sewing kit in hands that didn't shake even though her heart was pounding. "You done this before," Boone said through gritted teeth. "My husband worked in a factory. Men got hurt." She tied off the last stitch, wrapped his arm tight. "You keep that clean, change the bandage every day. If it gets red or hot, you tell me." "Yes, ma'am." The men who'd crowded in to watch were quiet. Then someone said, "Hell of a thing," and someone else nodded, and just like that, something shifted. Hale appeared in the doorway. His eyes went to Boone's arm, then to Clara, still holding the bloody cloth. "He gonna be all right? Should be. Needs to rest it for a few days." Hale nodded. "Boone, you're on light duty till that heals. Clara," he paused. "Thank you." 2 words, but the way he said them, careful and deliberate, made them feel like more. Look, that night, after dinner was cleared and the kitchen scrubbed, Clara sat on the cookhouse steps and watched the sun go down. The sky turned colors that didn't have names, and the air cooled enough to breathe easy. Footsteps crunched in the dirt. She didn't turn. "Mind company?" Hale's voice, low and unhurried. "It's your ranch." He sat on the step below hers, forearms resting on his knees. For a while, neither of them spoke. It wasn't uncomfortable, just 2 people too tired for small talk. "You did good today," he said finally, "with Boone. Just did what needed doing. Most people freeze or panic." He glanced back at her. "You didn't." Clara shrugged. "Panic doesn't fix anything." "No, it doesn't." He looked out at the darkening hills. "You hear what they're saying in town?" "Some of it." "Does it bother you?" She considered. "I've been bothered by worse." Hale nodded slowly. "I don't care what they think, but if it gets to where they're making trouble for you, I'll let you know." "All right." He stood, brushed dust off his pants. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's the same as today." "Isn't it always?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. Then he walked away, boots steady on the packed earth, and Clara sat alone under a sky full of stars and tried to remember the last time someone had checked if she was all right. It had been a while. Sunday afternoon, her half-day, Clara walked to the creek that ran along the southern edge of the ranch. It was shallow this time of year, but there was a spot where cottonwoods grew thick and the water pooled deep enough to sit in. She'd found it her second week, a place where no one could see her and she could let her guard down. She waded in, skirt hiked to her knees, and let the cold water run over her feet. Closed her eyes, breathed. 6 months since Daniel died. 6 months since the foreman came to her door, hat in his hands, and said there'd been an accident, a fire, the factory was gone, and so were 12 men, including her husband. 6 months since she'd stopped being Clara Whitlock, wife, and became Clara Whitlock, widow. The money ran out fast. Funeral costs, debts Daniel hadn't told her about, rent on the apartment they couldn't afford even when he was working. She sold everything worth selling, took in laundry, mending, anything that paid. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. So when she saw the advertisement, cook needed, Frontier Ranch, room and board provided, she'd packed her bag and bought a ticket west without looking back. Because what was there to look back at? An empty apartment, a city that didn't care, a life that had ended when the factory burned. Here at least she could work. She could be useful. She could wake up with a purpose, even if that purpose was just biscuits and coffee and keeping men fed. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Clara opened her eyes, watched the water slide past. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats, coming fast. She scrambled up the bank, dripping, just as Tommy rounded the bend on horseback, face flushed. "You got to come quick," he said, breathless. "There's men at the ranch. They're saying Hale owes money, a lot of it, and if you don't pay, they're taking the land." Clara's stomach dropped. "What men?" "Victor Crow's men. He owns half the county, got his fingers in everything, and he just showed up with papers saying Ridgeback belongs to him now." She didn't ask more questions, just grabbed her shawl and climbed up behind Tommy, and they rode back toward the ranch like the devil himself was chasing them. Because maybe he was. By the time they reached the ranch, 4 horses were tied outside the main house. sleek animals that hadn't done a day's work in their lives. Clara slid off Tommy's mount before it fully stopped, her wet skirt slapping against her legs as she hurried across the yard. The front door stood open. Voices drifted out, one she recognized as Hale's, low and controlled, and another that cut through the air like a blade wrapped in silk. She stepped inside without knocking. The main room was sparse, functional furniture arranged without thought for comfort. Hale stood near the fireplace, jaw tight, facing three men in suits that cost more than most folks earned in a year. The one in the center was older, maybe 50, with silver hair swept back and a face that probably smiled often, but never meant it. "Ah," the man said, turning toward Clara with theatrical surprise. "And who might this be?" "The cook." Hale's tone was flat. "She's got nothing to do with this, Crow." So this was Victor Crow. Clara had heard his name in town, always spoken with a mix of respect and wariness. He owned the bank, the lumber mill, and most of the cattle that grazed on land he'd bought cheap from desperate men. A vulture in expensive clothes. "The cook." Crow's eyes traveled over Clara, assessing. "Interesting choice, Hale. She's a bit refined for ranch work, wouldn't you say? I'd say my hiring choices aren't your concern, but your debts are." Crow gestured to one of his companions, who stepped forward with a leather folder. $3,000, Ethan. That's what you borrowed to keep this place running after the drought. Due 6 months ago. You've paid nothing." "I've paid what I could, which is nothing." Crow opened the folder, made a show of reviewing papers. "According to the terms you signed, failure to pay gives me the right to claim the property as collateral. This ranch, all buildings, livestock, and land, it's mine now." Clara's hands curled into fists. She knew debt, knew how it wrapped around you like rope, tightening every time you tried to breathe. But she also knew men like Crow, who used debt like a weapon. "You're early," Hale said. "Contract gives me 8 months. I've got 2 left." Had 2 left. Crow pulled out another paper, handed it to Hale. "Amendment filed with the county last month. New terms, 6 months, not 8. All perfectly legal." Hale read the paper, his face unreadable, but Clara saw his knuckles go white where he gripped it. "I never signed this." "You signed the original contract. Clause 17 allows for amendments under certain circumstances. The drought qualified. Your signature was binding for all subsequent changes." Crow's smile was a scalpel. "I have lawyers who assure me it's airtight." "Lawyers you pay. Everyone gets paid by someone, Ethan. That's how the world works." Crow tucked the folder under his arm. "I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you 2 weeks to clear out. Take your personal effects. Your crew can find work elsewhere. The land stays. This land's been in my family for 20 years. And now it's in mine. Business, nothing personal." Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Seems pretty personal to change contracts behind someone's back." Crow's attention swung to her, sharp and sudden. "I'm sorry, did the cook just speak to me?" "She did," Clara said. "And she's wondering how a man sleeps at night knowing he steals from people too proud to fight back." One of Crow's men moved, but Crow raised a hand, stopping him. His smile widened. "Fascinating. Tell me, Mrs. Whitlock." "Mrs. Whitlock, are you always this forward, or just when you've decided to insert yourself into matters you don't understand?" "I understand plenty. I understand you saw a man struggling and decided to take advantage instead of offering help. I understand you changed the rules when he wasn't looking, and I understand that just because something's legal doesn't mean it's right." Silence filled the room, thick enough to choke on. Hale's jaw worked like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Tommy had appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Crow studied Clara for a long moment. Then he laughed, genuinely amused. "My word. Ethan, where did you find this one? She's got more fire than you do. Leave her out of it." "Oh, I intend to, though I have to say," Crow's voice dropped, velvet over steel. "Hiring a widow to cook, having her live on the property, alone among all these men. The town's already talking, you know, about what kind of establishment you're really running here. Might want to be careful. Reputation's a fragile thing." The threat hung in the air, poisonous and clear. Clara felt it like a hand around her throat, but she didn't step back, didn't lower her eyes. 2 weeks, Ethan." Crow headed for the door, his men following. "After that, you're trespassing on my land." They left in a cloud of dust and certainty, and Clara stood in the too-quiet room watching Hale stare at the papers in his hand like they might burst into flames if he looked hard enough. "You shouldn't have said anything." His voice was hoarse. "Maybe not. He'll use it against you, against both of us. Let him try."
Hale looked at her then, really looked, and something in his face cracked open just enough for her to see the exhaustion underneath. "You don't know what you're getting into. Then tell me."
He set the papers on the table, pressed both palms against the surface like he needed something solid to hold on to. "After my father died, the ranch was in bad shape. Drought hit hard, lost half the herd, couldn't pay the hands. I needed money fast or I'd lose everything. Crow offered a loan, said it was simple, straightforward. I was desperate. I didn't read the fine print. There's always fine print with men like him."
"Yeah, well, I know that now." He straightened, rolled his shoulders like shrugging off weight. "Doesn't matter. I've got 2 weeks to figure something out or it's done." "Can you pay him?" "Not even close. I'd need $3,000. I've got maybe 200 saved. Every other cent goes to keeping this place running."
Clara's mind raced through possibilities. Loans, investors, selling off pieces of the ranch. But all of it would take time they didn't have, and all of it would likely lead back to Crow somehow. Men like him had their fingers in everything. There has to be a way. If there is, I haven't found it. Hale picked up his hat from the chair, turned it in his hands. "I appreciate what you tried to do in there, but Clara, you should start looking for work somewhere else. When Crow takes this place, he won't keep anyone on, especially not you. I'm not leaving. You don't have a choice. Neither do you, but you're not giving up." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "I've got nothing to lose. You do." "What?" "Exactly. Another job cooking for people who'll talk about me anyway? Another place where I'm the outsider?" Clara shook her head. "I'm staying. We'll figure this out." "We." He said it like testing the weight of a new word. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. "All right. We'll try." Tommy cleared his throat from the doorway. "Boss, the men are asking what happened. Should I tell them?" "Tell them the truth. They deserve to know." Hale set his hat on his head, adjusted it. "Meeting in an hour. I'll explain everything." He walked out, shoulders squared despite everything, and Clara was left standing in a room that suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in with the weight of what she'd just promised. She'd told Hale she was staying. Now she had to figure out how to make that mean something. The crew gathered in the barn as the sun dropped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. 8 men plus Tommy, faces ranging from worried to angry to resigned. They'd all worked ranches before. They knew what debt looked like, what happened when men like Victor Crow came calling. Hale stood before them, hat in his hands, and told them everything. The loan, the changed terms, the 2-week deadline. He didn't sugarcoat it, didn't make promises he couldn't keep, just laid out the facts and let them land where they would. "I can't pay you what I owe," he finished. "If you want to leave, find work elsewhere. I understand. No hard feelings. But if you stay, I can promise you 2 more weeks of work and whatever I can scrape together when it's done." The men exchanged looks. Boone spoke first, his bandaged arm held careful against his chest. "This ranch been good to me. Treated me fair when others wouldn't. I'm staying." "Me too," said another hand, older man named Garrett with a limp from a bad fall years back. "Crow's a snake. I won't work for him." One by one they agreed, some quietly, some with anger in their voices directed at Crow, at the unfairness of it all. Only one man, a drifter who'd been hired 3 weeks ago, shook his head. "Nothing personal, Hale, but I got to eat. Can't do that on promises." "Understood. You'll get paid for the time you worked." The drifter nodded, left without ceremony. The rest stayed, a small, stubborn circle of men who'd decided that loyalty mattered more than sense. Tommy was the last to speak. "What's the plan, boss?" "Don't have one yet," Hale admitted. "But we keep working, keep the ranch running. Maybe something will turn up." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. Bye-bye. Clara walked back to the cookhouse as twilight settled over the valley, her mind churning. 2 weeks. 14 days to somehow find $3,000 or watch Hale lose everything. The math didn't work. There was no scenario where they came up with that kind of money in time. Unless an idea started forming, fragile and half wild. She turned it over, examined it from different angles. It was risky, maybe stupid, but every good option had already been exhausted, which left the dangerous ones. She needed more information first. Saturday came, and Clara made her usual trip to town. The mercantile was busier than normal. Women clustering near the fabric display, men discussing cattle prices near the seed barrels. Conversations died when she entered, picked up again in whispers after she passed. Clara ignored them, gathered her supplies with practiced efficiency. Flour, salt, coffee, sugar, cornmeal, beans, a sack of potatoes. The mercantile owner's wife, Mrs. Hadley, stern-faced and permanently disapproving, tallied the items without warmth. "That'll be $8.40. Clara counted out the money from the ranch account, watched Mrs. Hadley's lips thin as she took it. Behind her, two women pretended to examine ribbon while clearly listening. "Shame about the Hale place," one of them said, just loud enough. "Though I can't say I'm surprised. Man living out there alone, hiring a woman like that? Margaret, hush! I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. It's not proper. Never has been." Clara's hand stilled on the counter. She could feel eyes on her back, weight of judgment pressing down. Part of her wanted to turn around, defend herself, explain that she was just trying to survive, same as anyone. But explanations never changed minds already made up. She finished gathering her purchases, loaded them into the wagon Tommy had brought around. He helped without speaking, jaw tight with anger he was trying to swallow. "Don't let them get to you," Clara said quietly. "Don't let them get to you. They're talking about you like you're... "I know what they're saying, Tommy. I've heard worse." "That don't make it right." "No, it doesn't." Clara climbed onto the wagon seat. "But getting angry won't change their minds. We've got bigger problems." Still, as they rode back toward the ranch, she couldn't shake the feeling that the whispers were gathering force, building toward something that would break whether she was ready or not. That night, after dinner was cleared and the men had retreated to the bunkhouse, Clara found Hale in the barn again. He was brushing down the gray mare, movements rhythmic and meditative. He looked up when she approached, didn't seem surprised. "Can't sleep?" "Haven't been sleeping much lately," Clara admitted. "You?" "Same." She leaned against the stall door, watched his hands move across the mare's flank. Strong hands, scarred from work, capable. "I've been thinking about your problem." "Our problem, you said." "Our problem." The word still felt strange, but less so each time. "What if you could make Crow look bad enough that he'd back off? Publicly, I mean. Force him to withdraw." Hale's hand stilled. "He owns half the town, Clara. Nobody's going to stand against him. Not if they think they're alone, but if enough people saw what he really is." She paused, choosing her words. "The town thinks you're failing because you're a bad rancher. What if they knew the truth? That Crow changed the contract, rigged the terms?" "They wouldn't care." "Some of them might, especially if they thought it could happen to them next." Clara stepped closer. "Crow's power comes from people being too scared or too isolated to fight back. But if you stood up, showed them what he did, I'd lose anyway. He's got lawyers, judges, the bank. I've got nothing. You've got the truth. And you've got people who know you're a fair man." Clara held his gaze. "It might not work, probably won't, but doing nothing definitely won't work." Hale set down the brush, turned to face her fully. In the dim light of the barn, his face was all shadows and hard angles. "You really think it's worth trying?" "I think you don't strike me as someone who goes down without a fight." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. "All right, say we try this. What exactly are you proposing?" "A town meeting, public forum. You present the evidence, show them what Crow did, make him defend himself in front of everyone. He'll just lie. Twist it around." "Maybe. But lies are harder to tell when everyone's watching, and if enough people start asking questions, start doubting him." She spread her hands. "It's a crack in the armor. Might be enough." Hale was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through. Clara could almost see him weighing risks, calculating odds. Finally, he nodded. "When?" "Soon, before the 2 weeks are up. Give people time to think about it, but not so much time Crow can prepare. You realize this will make things worse for you. The talk, I mean. Town already thinks..." He stopped, jaw working. "I know what they think. Let them think it. I'm not doing this for them." "Why are you doing it?" Clara didn't have a simple answer. Because she was tired of men like Crow taking what they wanted. Because Hale had given her work when she needed it and treated her fair. Because for the first time in months she felt like she was part of something that mattered, even if that something was fighting a losing battle. Because it's right, she said finally. That enough? Hale studied her, and something in his face softened just slightly. Yeah, that's enough. They spent the next 3 days preparing. Hale dug out every piece of paperwork related to the loan, the original contract, correspondence with Crow's office, the amended terms he'd never signed. Clara helped him organize it, build a timeline that showed exactly when and how Crow had changed the rules. Tommy rode into town to quietly spread word about the meeting, framing it as a discussion about business practices affecting local ranchers. Enough people were struggling that the topic drew interest, though whether they'd actually show up was another question. The meeting was set for Thursday evening in the town hall, a drafty building that usually hosted church socials and the occasional trial. Clara spent Thursday afternoon cooking enough food for an army. If people came, she wanted them fed. Empty stomachs made for hostile crowds. By 7 o'clock, the hall was half full. Maybe 40 people, more than Clara expected, but fewer than they needed. She recognized faces from the mercantile, the saloon, the feed store. Mrs. Hadley sat in the front row, expression forbidding. The banker, a nervous man named Sullivan who worked for Crow, perched near the door like he might bolt. Hale stood at the front, papers in hand, looking like a man about to face a firing squad. Clara sat to the side, close enough to support, but far enough not to be a distraction. The murmuring died as Hale cleared his throat. Thank you for coming. I know it's late and you've all got early mornings. I'll try to keep this brief. He set the papers on the podium. Most of you know I've been running Ridgeback Ranch since my father passed. And most of you know I took a loan from Victor Crow to keep it going through the drought. Heads nodded. This wasn't news. What you don't know is how that loan's been handled. The original terms gave me 8 months to pay. I signed in good faith, planning to make it work. But last month, Crow filed an amendment changing the deadline to 6 months. An amendment I never saw, never signed, and didn't know about until he showed up claiming my ranch as collateral. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Hale pressed on. Contract says he can do this. Clause 17 allows amendments under certain circumstances. But there's a difference between legal and right, and what Crow did, changing terms without notice, using technicalities to take a man's land, that's not right. You signed the contract, someone called from the back. Should have read it closer. You're right, I should have. That's on me. But how many of you have loans with Crow? Mortgages, business lines, equipment financing? Hale's gaze swept the room. How many of you have actually read every clause? And how many of you are trusting that the man holding your debt won't change the rules when it suits him? The murmurs grew louder. Clara saw people exchanging glances, uncertainty creeping in. Mrs. Hadley stood, voice sharp. This is all very dramatic, Mr. Hale, but it sounds like you're asking us to feel sorry for you because you couldn't pay your debts. That's not Mr. Crow's fault. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking you to look at what happened and decide if this is the kind of business you want running our town. Our town is thriving because of Mr. Crow's investments. Is it? Hale's voice cut through. When's the last time anyone opened a new business here? When's the last time we had more than one bank so people had a choice? Crow doesn't invest in Copper Hollow. He owns it. And anyone who thinks they're safe from what happened to me is fooling themselves. The room erupted in voices, people arguing, defending, questioning. Clara watched it unfold, heart pounding. This was the moment. Either the town would see the truth, or they'd close ranks around Crow because he was powerful and Hale wasn't. Then the door opened. Victor Crow walked in, flanked by 2 of his men, and the hall went silent. He surveyed the crowd with an expression of bemused tolerance, like a parent discovering children playing at something they didn't understand. Ethan, he said, voice carrying effortlessly, I heard you were hosting a gathering. Thought I should attend. Hale's face went hard. This doesn't concern you. Oh, but it does. When a man starts making accusations about my business practices, spreading doubt among my clients, that concerns me very much. Crow moved to the front, positioned himself beside the podium like he owned it. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate Mr. Hale's passion, I really do. But let's be clear about what's happening here. A man took a loan he couldn't repay and is now trying to avoid consequences by painting me as the villain. You changed the contract. I amended the terms within my legal right to do so. The original contract, which Mr. Hale signed, explicitly allows for such amendments. If he'd maintained regular communication with my office, he would have been informed, but he didn't. He buried his head in the sand and hoped the problem would disappear. It was a masterful performance. Crow's tone was reasonable, almost sympathetic. He made Hale sound incompetent, irresponsible, and the crowd was listening. Clara felt something crack inside her chest. She'd known this might happen, that Crow would twist things. But watching him do it, watching people believe him, it filled her with a fury so sharp she could taste it. She stood. "You're lying." Every eye turned to her. Crow's smile didn't falter. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitlock, was it? I don't believe I was speaking to you." "No, you were speaking to them, telling them that Mr. Hale is irresponsible, that this is his fault, but you left out the part where you deliberately made it impossible for him to succeed. That's quite an accusation." "It's the truth. You changed the deadline knowing he couldn't pay in time. You used legal language to hide what you were really doing, stealing his land. And now you're standing here pretending to be the reasonable one while you take everything he's worked for." Crow's expression cooled. "You're emotional, understandable, given your proximity to the situation, but emotion isn't evidence." "Then let's talk about evidence." Claire's voice was shaking, but she pushed through it. "How many other people here have loans with you? How many have actually reviewed their contracts recently? Because I'd bet money that buried in those clauses, there are terms that let you do exactly what you did to Mr. Hale. Change the rules, call in debts early, take what's yours." Silence. People were looking at each other now, doubt spreading like cracks in ice. "This is absurd," Crow said, but there was an edge to his voice now. "I've been nothing but fair. You've been predatory." Clara stepped forward into the center of the room. "You see people struggling and you offer help with one hand while setting traps with the other. And when they fall into those traps, you act like it's their fault for not being smart enough to see what you were doing. Mrs. Whitlock, I understand you're trying to help your employer, but spreading defamatory lies, is it defamatory if it's true? Are you saying you didn't amend Mr. Hale's contract? Are you saying you gave him proper notice? Because if you're willing to say that under oath, in front of a judge, of course I'm willing, then prove it." Clara held his gaze. "Show everyone here the paperwork, the original contract, the amendment, the notice you claim you sent. Let them see exactly what happened, unless you'd rather they just take your word for it." Crow's jaw tightened. For the first time, he looked less certain. Around the room, people were muttering, shifting. The banker by the door looked like he wanted to disappear into the floorboards. "The specifics of Mr. Hale's loan are confidential. Convenient. But I assure you, everything was handled according to proper procedure." Crow's smile returned, brittle now. "As for you, Mrs. Whitlock, I think it's interesting how passionately you defend a man who's employed you for barely a month. One might wonder what exactly your arrangement entails." The implication hung in the air, ugly and deliberate. Clara felt it like a slap, heard the gasps from the crowd. This was what he'd been holding back, the weapon he'd kept in reserve. Hale took a step forward, fists clenched. "You watch your mouth. I'm simply observing that the situation appears irregular. A widow, living alone on a ranch with a crew of men, no proper chaperone. I'm the cook." Claire's voice cut through, clear and cold. "I work. I earn wages. That's the arrangement. And if you're trying to make it into something ugly because you're cornered, then you're more desperate than I thought." "Desperate? My dear woman, I own half this town." "Then act like it." Clara turned to face the crowd, addressed them directly. "I came to Copper Hollow because I needed work. Mr. Hale hired me because he needed a cook, that's all. But Mr. Crow would rather you think something improper is happening because if he can make you doubt me, you'll doubt what I'm saying about him. It's misdirection, and it's working." She could see it in their faces. Some believed her, some didn't. Some were still deciding. Mrs. Hadley looked like she'd swallowed something sour, but a few people, scattered through the crowd, were nodding, thinking. Tommy stood from where he'd been sitting in the back. "Clara's telling the truth. I work the ranch too. She's there to cook, and she does it better than anyone we've had. That's it." Boone stood next, bandaged arm and all. "She patched me up when I got hurt. Didn't have to. Could have let someone else handle it. But she did it without fuss, without asking for anything. That's the kind of person she is." One by one, the ranch hands stood, not speaking, just standing, a silent testimony that carried more weight than words. Crow looked at them and something dangerous flickered in his eyes. How touching, a united front, but it changes nothing. Mr. Hale owes me money he doesn't have. In 10 days, Ridgeback Ranch becomes my property. That's simply business. Then let's talk business. Sullivan, the banker, had stood. His voice was thin, nervous, but determined. I've worked for Mr. Crow for 8 years, and in that time I've processed 6 foreclosures, all of them similar to Mr. Hale's situation. Loans that suddenly became due early, terms that changed without clear notice. I thought it was just bad luck, people being careless. But after hearing this, he trailed off, but the damage was done. Doubt had taken root. Crow's mask slipped. Just for a second, Clara saw rage underneath, cold and controlled. Then it was gone, replaced by polite disappointment. I see. Well, this has been educational, but I have other matters to attend to. Mr. Hale, I'll see you in 10 days when you vacate my property. Mrs. Whitlock, he paused, smiled. I hope you find employment elsewhere. Copper Hollow is a small town. Not everyone is comfortable with women of uncertain reputation. He left, his men following, and the room exhaled as one. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Mrs. Hadley stood, gathered her shawl. I think we've heard enough. She walked out without looking at anyone. Others followed, some quickly, uncomfortable with the conflict, others slowly, thoughtfully. Clara watched them go and tried to calculate whether they'd done enough, changed enough minds. Tommy appeared at her elbow. That was something. That was a disaster, Clara said quietly. Are you kidding? You made him mad. You made him show his hand. People saw it. Some people. Not enough. Hale joined them, face unreadable. For a long moment, he just looked at her, and Clara braced for anger, for blame. She'd escalated things, made Crow target her directly. She'd confirmed every ugly rumor the town whispered. Thank you, Hale said finally. Clara blinked. For what? I just made everything worse. No. You told the truth, even when it cost you. He glanced around the emptying hall. I don't know if it'll change anything, but at least now people are thinking. That's more than we had before. Clara wanted to believe him, but as they walked out into the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just lit a fuse on something they couldn't control, and all they could do now was wait for the explosion. The morning after the town meeting, Clara woke to silence. No rooster calls, no bunkhouse bell, just an unsettling quiet that pressed against the cookhouse walls like held breath. She dressed quickly, started the stove, but her hands felt clumsy, distracted. The confrontation with Crow replayed in her mind. His smile, his threats, the way he'd turned her defense of Hale into something dirty. She had biscuits in the oven when Tommy appeared in the doorway, face pale. You need to see this. Clara followed him outside. There, nailed to the cookhouse door, was a handwritten sign. The letters were crude, angry slashes of charcoal. Horror. Her stomach dropped. Tommy was already prying it loose, jaw set tight, but the damage was done. She'd seen it. And judging by the way the ranch hands were gathered near the bunkhouse, pretending not to look, they'd all seen it too. I'll find who did this, Tommy said, crumpling the sign in his fist. I swear. Don't! Clara's voice came out steadier than she felt. It doesn't matter who wrote it. Half the town's thinking it anyway. That don't make it right. No, but going after whoever did this just proves we're rattled. She turned back toward the cookhouse, forced herself to walk normally despite the heat crawling up her neck. Breakfast needs finishing. She made it inside before her hands started shaking, stood at the counter, gripping the edge, breathing through the tightness in her chest. She'd known this would happen. The moment she'd stood up in that town hall, she'd known Crow would retaliate, and the town would follow his lead. But knowing and experiencing were different animals, and right now the experience felt like glass under her skin. The door creaked. Hale stepped in, hat in his hands, and she knew from his face that he'd seen the sign too. I'm sorry. His voice was rough. This is my fault. I never should have let you speak. You didn't let me do anything. I chose to. Still nothing. Clara turned to face him. I knew what I was doing, and I'd do it again. He studied her for a long moment, something complicated moving behind his eyes. Most people would have left by now. I'm not most people. No.
A pause. You're not. The biscuits were starting to burn. Clara pulled them out, set them on the counter harder than necessary. Hale watched her work, not speaking, and somehow his silence was easier to bear than sympathy would have been. Town's going to get worse, he said finally. Crow won't let this go. He'll make sure everyone knows he's angry, and they'll fall in line because that's what people do. So what do we do?
We keep our heads down, work the ranch, hope that in 10 days, when he takes this place, he's satisfied enough to leave you alone. Clara's hands stilled. You're giving up. I'm being realistic. No, you're being scared. She faced him fully, flour dusting her sleeves. Last night you thanked me for telling the truth. Said people were thinking. Now you want to hide? I want to keep you safe. I don't need you to keep me safe. I need you to keep fighting. Hale's jaw tightened. And what exactly are we fighting for, Clara? Even if we turn the whole town against Crow, it doesn't change the contract. He's still got the law on his side. Then we change the law. That's not... He stopped, shook his head. You can't just change the law. Why not? Laws get changed all the time. Someone wrote this contract, someone can challenge it. We just need to find the right person. There's no right person. Crow owns the judge, the sheriff, probably half the county officials. The system's rigged. Clara wanted to argue, but the defeat in his voice stopped her. This was what broke people, she realized. Not the first blow, but the slow accumulation of them, wearing you down until fighting back felt pointless. She'd felt it herself after Daniel died, that crushing weight of inevitability. But she'd also learned that sometimes the only way through was to refuse to accept what everyone else called inevitable. You're right, she said quietly. The system's rigged. Crow's got power we don't have, and maybe in 10 days he takes this ranch and there's nothing we can do to stop it. She paused. But that's 10 days from now. Today, we've got a kitchen to run and hands to feed and work to do, so let's do it. Hale looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. Then, slowly, something in his face shifted. Not hope exactly, but something adjacent to it. Determination, maybe. The kind born from spite instead of optimism. All right, he said. We do the work. The ranch settled into a tense routine. The hands worked harder than ever, like they could somehow save the place through sheer effort. Clara cooked, cleaned, kept everything running with mechanical precision, and tried to ignore the looks she got when she went into town for supplies. The whispers had graduated to outright stares. Women crossed the street to avoid her. The mercantile owner's wife served her with pinched lips and disapproving silence. Once, passing the saloon, Clara heard laughter and a crude comment about Hale's woman, followed by more laughter. She kept walking, chin up, eyes forward, let them think what they wanted. But it wore on her. Each look, each whisper, each turn back added weight, until some mornings it felt like drowning just to get out of bed. She'd wake before dawn, lie in the dark, and wonder if Hale was right. If the smart thing was to leave, find work somewhere else, let Copper Hollow fade into the past like everything else she'd lost. Then she'd hear the roosters, the bunkhouse bell, the sounds of the ranch waking up, and she'd rise, dress, start the coffee, and do it all again. On the 5th day after the town meeting, Tommy came back from a supply run looking troubled. What happened? Clara asked, kneading dough at the kitchen counter. Ran into Sullivan, the banker. Tommy set down the flour sack he'd been carrying. He wanted me to give you something. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. Clara wiped her hands, took it. Inside was a list of names, 6 of them, each with a number next to it. At the bottom, Sullivan had written in cramped handwriting, "Other ranchers Crow foreclosed on. Thought you should know." Clara's heart started beating faster. Did he say anything else? Just that he's been thinking about what you said, about patterns. Tommy shifted uncomfortably. He looked scared, though, like even writing that down was dangerous. She studied the list. 6 foreclosures, all in the past 3 years. All ranchers, all for amounts between $2,000 and $5,000. The same play, run over and over. We need to talk to them, Clara said. They're scattered all over the county. Some moved away after they lost their land. Then we talk to the ones still here. She folded the paper, tucked it into her apron pocket. If Crow's done this before, there might be a pattern, something we can use. Tommy looked doubtful but nodded. I'll ask around, see who's still local. That evening, after dinner was cleared, Clara showed the list to Hale. They sat at the long kitchen table, oil lamp casting shadows across his weathered face as he read.
I knew some of these men, he said quietly. Jack Porter. He used to run cattle on the North Range. Good man. Lost his place 2 years back. Thought it was just bad luck and worse decisions. What if it wasn't? What if it was exactly what happened to me? Hale set the paper down, rubbed his eyes. Even if that's true, what changes? These men already lost their land. They can't get it back. No, but they can testify, tell their stories. If we can show a pattern, to who? The Judge Crow probably paid off? The sheriff who works for him? Clara bit back frustration. You're the one who said people were starting to think. That's something. We just need to give them more to think about. Or we make things worse and Crow comes down on all of us harder. Hale stood, paced to the window. I appreciate what you're trying to do, Clara, but sometimes knowing when to quit is the smart play. And sometimes quitting is just quitting. He turned and there was something raw in his face now. You think I want to give up? This ranch is all I have. It's my father's legacy, my home. Losing it. His voice cracked slightly. But I can survive losing land. I can't survive watching you get hurt because you're trying to save something that's already gone. The words hung between them. Heavy with meaning, Clara wasn't sure she was ready to unpack. She looked at him, really looked, and saw past the careful control to the fear underneath. Not fear of losing the ranch, fear of losing her. I'm not fragile, she said softly. I know, that's what scares me. He came back to the table, sat across from her. You're strong enough to stand up to Crow, to the whole town. But that strength's going to get you hurt, and He stopped, seemed to struggle with the words. I can't be the reason that happens. Clara reached across the table, not quite touching his hand, but close enough that the intention was clear. You're not the reason. I'm choosing this. Choosing to stay, to fight. That's on me. Why? It was the same question he'd asked before, and she still didn't have a simple answer. Because the ranch felt like home in a way nowhere else had since she'd lost her own. Because fighting Crow felt like fighting every man who'd ever used power to take what they wanted. Because Ethan Hale looked at her like she was capable instead of broken, and that mattered more than she wanted to admit. Because it's worth it, she said instead. The ranch, the people here, it's worth fighting for. He held her gaze and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, maybe. Or an acknowledgement that whatever this was, partnership, alliance, something else entirely, it mattered to both of them. All right, Hale said finally. We talk to the others on that list. See what they know. But Clara, if this gets dangerous, if Crow escalates, you promise me you'll leave. Find somewhere safe. Only if you promise the same. A ghost of a smile touched his face. Deal. What? They found Jack Porter 3 days later, living in a small cabin on the eastern edge of the county. He was older than Hale, maybe 50, with the kind of weathered face that came from decades of hard sun and harder luck. When Hale explained why they'd come, Porter's expression went carefully blank. Don't know what you think I can tell you. Just want to hear your story, Clara said. How you lost your ranch. Porter studied her, then Hale, then sighed and gestured them inside. The cabin was sparse, clean, the home of a man who'd learned to live with less. They sat at a small table while Porter made coffee from grounds that had clearly been used before. Took a loan from Crow 5 years back, he started. Needed it to buy breeding stock, expand the herd. Terms seemed fair, $3,000 at 8%, 2 years to pay. I figured I could manage it. Could you? Hale asked. First year, yeah. Made my payments on time. But second year, drought hit. Lost half my calves, had to sell off cattle just to feed the rest. Fell behind on the loan. Porter's hands tightened around his cup. Crow was understanding at first, said we could work out a payment plan. Then one day his men showed up with papers saying the loan was due immediately. Some clause I'd signed about default, acceleration of debt. I had 30 days to pay the full amount or lose the ranch. Did you have the money? Had maybe 800 saved, nowhere near enough. I went to Crow, tried to negotiate, offered to sell off more cattle, anything. He just smiled and said business was business. Clara's chest tightened. How long ago was this? 3 years, lost the ranch, moved here. Been working odd jobs ever since. Porter looked at Hale. You're in the same situation? Similar. Different details,
Same result. Then you know how it goes. Crow's got lawyers, contracts, all of it legal and binding. You can fight, but you'll lose. Might as well save yourself the trouble. That's what everyone keeps saying, Clara leaned forward. But what if we could prove he's doing this deliberately, that he's targeting ranchers, using these clauses to steal land? Porter laughed, bitter and tired. Prove it to who? The law's on his side, always has been. What about the court of public opinion? If enough people knew what he was doing, people already know. They just don't care, or they're too scared to say anything. Porter set down his cup. Look, I appreciate you coming out here, but the best advice I can give you is to take what you can carry and walk away. Fighting Crow just means losing twice. Once, when he takes your land, and again when he destroys everything else you got left. They left an hour later, Clara's mind churning. Porter's story matched Hale's almost exactly. The loan, the drought, the sudden demand for full payment. A pattern so clear it might as well have been written in stone. But Porter was right about one thing. Proof didn't matter if no one was willing to act on it. 2 more names on that list are still local, Hale said as they rode back. But if they all tell the same story, they will, Clara interrupted, because Crow's been doing this for years. The question is what we do about it. There's nothing to do. You heard Porter. I heard a man who gave up. That doesn't mean we have to. Hale pulled the horse to a stop, turned to look at her. What exactly are you planning? Clara didn't have a plan. Not yet. But an idea was forming, rough and risky. Crow's power comes from people being isolated. Each rancher thinks they're the only one who failed, the only one who couldn't make it work. But if we could bring them together, show them the pattern, they're not going to stand up to him. Porter made that clear. Maybe not, but their stories might convince others. She met his eyes. People in town who are on the fence. People who aren't sure if Crow's a businessman or a thief. If we can get enough voices, it still won't change the contract. No, but it might change how people see what's happening. And if enough people start asking questions, start pushing back. She stopped, tried to find the right words. You said it yourself. Crow's power is about control, but control breaks when people stop being afraid. Hale was quiet for a long moment. You're talking about a fight we can't win. I'm talking about a fight worth having whether we win or not. Something in his expression shifted, and Clara saw him making a choice. Not to believe they could win, but to stop letting fear of losing dictate his actions. It was a subtle thing, easy to miss, but she'd learned to read the small changes in his face. All right, he said. We talk to the others, get their stories, then we figure out what to do with them. The second rancher, a man named Garrett Sutton, had moved to the next county but came back when Tommy tracked him down with a message. He met them at a crossroads halfway between territories, sitting on horseback with the wary posture of someone expecting trouble. Make it quick, Sutton said. Got work waiting. Hale explained what they were doing, why they needed his story. Sutton listened without interrupting, face unreadable. You're wasting your time, he said when Hale finished. I tried to fight Crow. Hired a lawyer, filed complaints, the whole thing. Know what happened? Lawyer dropped me after 2 weeks, said he couldn't win against Crow's legal team. Judge threw out my case before it even started. And Crow made sure no one in this county would hire me for 3 months. I only got work again after I left. But you tried, Clara said. That's more than most people do. And it cost me everything, my ranch, my reputation, damn near my sanity. Sutton's horse shifted, uneasy. Whatever you're planning, forget it. Crow always wins. Always. Only question is how much you lose before you accept it. He rode off before they could respond, leaving Clara and Hale standing in the dust with the taste of defeat thick in their mouths. The third rancher was dead. Died the previous winter, according to the widow who answered the door of a small house in town. She looked at them with eyes that had seen too much grief and not enough justice. My husband couldn't live with losing the ranch, she said quietly. Worked that land his whole life. When Crow took it, took everything we'd built. Her voice caught. He just gave up, stopped eating, stopped sleeping, was gone 3 months later. Clara felt the words like a physical blow. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring him back. And it won't save you either. The widow started to close the door, then paused. You seem like a good woman. My advice? Run. Get as far from Victor Crow as you can and don't look back. The door shut with quiet finality. Clara and Hale rode back to Ridgeback in silence. The sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that should have been beautiful, but just felt like a reminder that time kept passing whether they were ready or not. 5 days left until Crow took the ranch. 5 days to somehow do what 3 other men hadn't managed. "We should stop," Hale said as they approached the ranch house. "This isn't helping, it's just—" He didn't finish. Clara, dismounted, stood looking at the ranch building silhouetted against the dying light. The barn, the bunkhouse, the cookhouse, where she'd made a home out of scraps and determination. In 5 days it would all belong to Crow, and she'd be back where she started. Alone, looking for work, running from a past that never stopped chasing. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that the worst thing was losing something you loved. After my husband died, after I lost our home, I thought that was the bottom, the worst it could get." She turned to face Hale. "But it's not. The worst thing is giving up, accepting that loss is inevitable, that fighting back is pointless. Because once you accept that, you're already gone. You're just waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Some fights can't be won, Clara." "Maybe not, but we haven't lost yet, and I'm not ready to act like we have." Hale dismounted, stood close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of carrying this alone for too long. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to stop protecting me. Stop deciding what I can handle. And I want you to fight like you've got something worth saving." She held his gaze. "Because you do. This ranch, these people, what you've built here, it matters. And if we go down, at least let's go down swinging." For a moment she thought he'd argue. Then he reached out, his hand settling on her shoulder, warm and solid. "You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most foolish." "Maybe both." "Yeah." His mouth quirked. "Maybe both." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her cot, staring at the ceiling, mind racing through possibilities and discarding them just as fast. They needed something that would force the town to act, something that would make Crow's pattern impossible to ignore. But what? She was still thinking when she heard footsteps outside. Quiet, trying to be stealthy. Her hand went to the knife she kept under her pillow, her father's knife, bone handle smooth from years of use. She rose, moved to the window. 3 figures, shadows in the moonlight, approaching the barn. Clara dressed fast, grabbed the knife, slipped out the back door. She could see them more clearly now. Young men, maybe late teens, carrying something. One of them had a torch. Her heart stopped. They were going to burn the barn. She ran, not thinking, just moving. "Hey!" The shout tore from her throat. "Stop!" The figures froze, turned. One of them swore. The one with the torch dropped it, and they scattered, running for horses tied at the fence line. Clara chased them for a few yards before her brain caught up with her body, and she realized she was alone, unarmed except for a knife, facing people willing to commit arson. She stopped, breathing hard, as they mounted and rode off. The dropped torch smoldered in the dirt. She stamped it out, hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. Lights came on in the bunkhouse. The barn door opened and Hale appeared, rifle in hand, hair disheveled like he'd been sleeping. "What happened?" 3 men. They were going to burn the barn. His face went hard. "Did you see their faces?" "Too dark. But one of them was young, skinny, tripped over his own feet running away." "Crow's doing." Hale lowered the rifle, jaw tight. "He's escalating." Tommy and several other hands appeared, pulling on boots, carrying whatever weapons they'd grabbed. Clara told them what she'd seen, tried to keep her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "We should post watches," Garrett said. "Round the clock. They might come back." "They will come back," Hale said. "Tonight was just a warning. Next time they'll make sure it burns." They organized shifts, 2 men at a time, circling the property through the night. Clara went back to the cookhouse but didn't bother trying to sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, knife beside her, watching the window. Dawn came slow and gray. The men gathered for breakfast looking haggard, speaking in low voices. The attempted arson had shaken them all, made the threat concrete in a way words hadn't. "We need to tell the sheriff," Boone said. "Sheriff works for Crow," Tommy countered. "He'll just say we can't prove anything." "Then what do we do? Just wait for them to burn us out?" The men looked to Hale, waiting for answers he clearly didn't have. Clara watched him struggle with it, saw the weight pressing down. "We document everything," she said. All eyes turned to her. "Every threat, every incident. We write it down, get it witnessed. And when they come back, because they will come back, We make sure everyone knows exactly what Crow's doing. That won't stop them from burning the barn, one of the hands pointed out. No, but it makes it harder for Crow to pretend he's just a businessman. Right now his power comes from operating in shadows. We drag him into the light. Hale met her eyes across the table. Something passed between them. An understanding, a commitment. They were past the point of backing down. Everyone keeps a journal, he said. Write down anything suspicious, times, descriptions, what happened. If anyone threatens you, tries to bribe you, anything, it gets documented. The men nodded, some more reluctantly than others. They finished breakfast in tense silence and dispersed to their work. Clara was washing dishes when Hale came back in, closing the door behind him. You could have been killed last night. So could you. That's different. Why? Because you're a man? She didn't turn around, kept scrubbing the same plate. I'm not leaving, Ethan, no matter what Crow does. I know. He moved closer, and she could feel him behind her, solid and present. That's what scares me. Clara set down the plate, turned. He was closer than she'd expected, close enough to see the worry carved into the lines around his eyes, the exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. Without thinking, she reached up, touched his face. Just her fingertips, resting against his jaw. We're going to be all right, she said, believing it, and not believing it in equal measure. Hale's hand came up, covered hers, held it there. Clara, whatever he was going to say got cut off by shouting from outside. They broke apart, moving to the window. A rider was coming fast, kicking up dust. As he got closer, Clara recognized Sullivan, the banker, looking terrified. Hale met him in the yard. What's wrong? Sullivan nearly fell off his horse, grabbed Hale's arm. Crow knows. About the list I gave you, the foreclosures. Someone told him I was helping. His voice shook. He came to my house this morning, said if I don't leave town by tomorrow, he'll make sure everyone knows I've been embezzling from the bank. It's not true. I never stole anything, but he's got forged documents, witnesses he paid off. He'll destroy me. Then stay and fight, Hale said. We'll back you up. You can't protect me from this. Nobody can. Sullivan pulled away, climbed back on his horse. I'm sorry. I thought I could help, but I can't. I have a family. I can't. I'm sorry. He rode off, and Clara watched him go with a sinking feeling in her chest. That was Crow's real power, she realized. Not the money or the lawyers or even the violence. It was fear. The certainty that fighting back would cost more than surrendering. And the terrible thing was, he was right. Sullivan's departure left a hollow feeling that settled over the ranch like fog. The men worked through the day with rifles propped near their tasks, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Clara cooked with her father's knife tucked into her apron pocket, close enough to grab. The waiting felt worse than action, every sound making her flinch, every dust cloud on the road a potential threat. 3 days left until Crow took the ranch. 3 days, and they were no closer to a solution than when this started. That evening, as Clara cleaned the kitchen, she heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. Her hand went to the knife, but then she recognized Tommy's voice calling out that it was friendly. She stepped outside to find 5 men dismounting in the yard. Strangers except for one, Jack Porter, the first foreclosed rancher they'd talked to. The others had the same weathered look, men who'd spent their lives working land they no longer owned. Hale emerged from the barn, confusion crossing his face. Jack? Heard what happened to Sullivan, Porter said. No greeting, just straight to business. Heard Crow's men tried to burn you out, and I got to thinking, maybe I was wrong. Maybe running away and keeping quiet is exactly what Crow wants. Makes it easier for him to keep doing this to the next man, and the next. One of the other men stepped forward, older, with a scar running down his left cheek. Name's Walter Briggs. Lost my ranch 4 years back. Same story as you. Loan, drought, sudden foreclosure. Thought it was my fault for not reading the contract better. Then Porter found me, told me about the others, about you. A third man spoke up, younger, but with eyes that had seen too much. Marcus Chen. My family ran cattle for 2 generations before Crow took it. We left the county, tried to forget. But Porter's right. Running doesn't solve anything. Porter looked at Clara, something like approval in his face. Your woman came to my cabin and told me fighting was worth it even if we lose. I called her foolish, But I've been thinking about that conversation every day since, and I realized I already lost. Worse than losing is living like a coward. I'm not his woman, Clara said automatically, then felt heat creep up her neck when Hale glanced at her. I'm the cook. Sure you are. Porter's tone suggested he didn't believe that for a second, but he let it drop. Point is, we're here. All of us got foreclosed by Crow using the same tricks he's using on you. We can't get our land back, but maybe we can help you keep yours. Or at least make enough noise that people can't ignore what he's doing anymore.
Hale looked at the 5 men, then at Clara, and she saw something shift in his expression. Not hope exactly, but something close. The realization that they weren't alone. Come inside, he said. Let's talk. They gathered in the main house, cramped around the table while Clara made coffee and listened to their stories. Each one was a variation on the same theme: loans made in good faith, circumstances that made repayment difficult, sudden demands for full payment backed by contract clauses buried in fine print. Crow's pattern, repeated so precisely, it couldn't be coincidence. The question is what we do with this information, Garrett Sutton said. He'd come back too, sitting in the corner with arms crossed. I tried the legal route. Didn't work. Because you tried it alone, Clara said. But 6 ranchers, all with the same story? That's harder to dismiss. You're talking about going public again, making another stand. Walter Briggs shook his head. Town didn't listen the first time. Why would they listen now? Because the first time was just Hale's word against Crow's. But now we've got evidence, a pattern, multiple witnesses. Clara paced the small room, thinking out loud. Crow's power comes from making each foreclosure look like an isolated failure. But if we show them all together, they'll still side with Crow, Marcus interrupted. He owns too much. People are scared. Some people? Not all. Clara stopped pacing, faced them. There are folks in town who've started asking questions. Who saw Crow's mask slip at the meeting? We gave them doubt. Now we give them proof. Tommy spoke from the doorway where he'd been listening. What kind of proof? Testimony? Documents. Everything these men can provide about their foreclosures laid out so even people who don't want to see it can't deny the pattern. She looked at Hale. We go back to the town. Bigger meeting this time. Bring all of them. Let them tell their stories. Make it impossible to ignore. Crow will shut it down, Hale said. Last time he showed up and turned the crowd. He'll do it again. Then we make sure the crowd is already on our side before he gets there. Clara's mind was racing now, pieces clicking together. We talk to people individually first. The shopkeepers, the farmers, anyone who's ever dealt with Crow's bank. We show them the pattern, give them time to process it without Crow standing there intimidating them. Then at the meeting, when he tries his usual tactics, they'll already know the truth. Porter rubbed his jaw, considering. It's risky. Crow finds out we're organizing against him. He'll come down hard. He's already coming down hard, Clara pointed out. He tried to burn the barn. He's threatening anyone who helps. The only question is whether we go down quietly or make enough noise that people remember. The men exchanged looks. Clara could see them weighing it. The risk against the potential, the fear against the anger they'd been carrying for years. I'm in, Porter said finally. I've got nothing left to lose and a debt to settle. One by one, the others agreed, some quickly, others after long pauses. Even Sutton, who'd been most skeptical, gave a reluctant nod. All right, Hale said. We've got 3 days. Clara, you're good with people. You organize who we talk to, what we say. The rest of us will spread out, cover as much ground as we can. He looked around the table. And we watch each other's backs. Crow's going to push back. We need to be ready. They spent the next 2 hours planning, dividing up names, coordinating stories. By the time the foreclosed ranchers left, riding off into the night with promises to return, Clara's head was spinning with details and her chest was tight with something that felt dangerously like hope. Hale walked her back to the cookhouse, both of them moving through darkness made familiar by weeks of routine. At her door, he paused. You really think this will work? I think it's our best chance, Clara said honestly, which isn't the same as a good chance, but it's what we've got. You're not what I expected. The words came out rough, like he hadn't meant to say them. When you stepped off that stage, I thought you'd last maybe a week. Figured you were running from something, same as everyone else who ends up out here. Didn't expect you to run toward the trouble instead. I got tired of running away. It doesn't get you anywhere except farther from where you started. He nodded slowly, understanding in his face. For what it's worth,
I'm glad you stayed. Yeah, me too. They stood there in the quiet, moths circling the lantern light, the night sounds of the ranch settling around them. Clara was acutely aware of how close he was, the way his presence felt solid and safe in a world that kept shifting under her feet. Ethan, Clara. They spoke at the same time, stopped, and something that might have been a laugh escaped both of them, despite everything. You first, he said. She hadn't known what she was going to say, hadn't thought beyond his name. But standing there in the darkness with this man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing, who'd trusted her judgment even when it scared him, who looked at her like she mattered, words came that she hadn't known she was ready to say. Thank you for not giving up. I know it would have been easier to just let this go, to cut your losses, but you didn't. And that means something. I think we both know I would have given up a week ago if you hadn't been here pushing. His hand came up, hesitated, then settled on her shoulder, warm through the fabric of her dress. Whatever happens, I want you to know you made this place better, made me better, I think. And I'm grateful for that.
The moment stretched, heavy with things unsaid. Clara's heart was beating too fast, and she knew if she stayed here, in this doorway, with his hand on her shoulder and his eyes searching her face, something would shift between them that couldn't be shifted back. And maybe that wouldn't be terrible. Maybe it would be exactly what she'd been avoiding admitting she wanted. But not yet. Not when everything was balanced on a knife's edge and they still had 3 days of fighting ahead. Get some sleep, she said softly. Tomorrow's going to be long. He nodded, let his hand drop, stepped back. You too. And Clara, keep that knife close. Always do. She watched him walk away, his silhouette disappearing into the dark toward the main house. And then she went inside and sat on her cot with her father's knife in her hands and tried to slow her racing heart.
The next 2 days were a blur of activity. Clara, Tommy, and the ranch hands split up, riding to farms and homesteads throughout the county with the foreclosed ranchers in tow. They talked to anyone who'd listen, laying out the pattern, showing the contracts, letting the men tell their stories. Some people slammed doors in their faces. Others listened politely and made no commitments. But a few, more than Clara had dared hope, looked at the evidence and saw what she saw. A system rigged to benefit one man at everyone else's expense. Mrs. Patterson, who ran a small dairy farm with her adult sons, studied the contracts for a long time before speaking. My husband took a loan from Crow 3 years before he passed. I've been paying it down steady, but the terms... She looked up, worry clear in her lined face. There's language in here I don't understand. About acceleration, about circumstances that could trigger early payment. That's how he works, Porter explained, his voice gentle despite the anger underneath. Puts in clauses that seem reasonable until he decides to use them. Then suddenly, you owe everything at once, and if you can't pay, he takes it all. Mrs. Patterson's hands shook slightly. I could be next. Or you could stand with us, Clara said. Help us show the town what he's doing before he does it to someone else. Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. I'll be at the meeting, and I'll bring others who might listen. They had similar conversations across the county. A blacksmith who'd borrowed to expand his forge. A widow who'd taken over her husband's freight business and needed capital for new wagons. A young couple trying to start a cattle operation, each one vulnerable to the same tactics Crow had used before. By the evening of the second day, Clara had commitments from 23 people to attend the meeting and hear the evidence. It wasn't everyone. It wasn't even close to a majority, but it was a start. Hale gathered everyone at the ranch that night. The hands, the foreclosed ranchers, Clara. They looked exhausted, running on determination and coffee. But there was something else in their faces too. A sense of purpose, maybe. Or just the grim satisfaction of knowing they'd tried. Meetings tomorrow at 7, Hale said. Same location as before. We present the evidence, let each of these men tell their story, and then we ask the town to stand with us. To demand Crow prove his contracts are legitimate, to push for an independent review. He won't allow it, Briggs said. The judge is in his pocket. Maybe. But if enough people are asking, if there's enough pressure, even bought judges have to care about appearances. Hale's jaw was set. And if it doesn't work, at least we made him fight for it. At least people know the truth. They dispersed to get what rest they could. Claire was heading to the cookhouse when she noticed orange light flickering against the night sky, coming from the direction of the road. She turned, squinting, and her blood went cold. Fire. A line of it, spreading across the dry grass between the ranch and town. Fire! The shout came from 3 throats at once. Men poured out of the bunkhouse, grabbing buckets, shovels, anything that could fight flames. The blaze was moving fast, pushed by the wind, heading straight for the ranch buildings. Hale was already running toward the barn, shouting orders. Wet down the buildings! Create a fire break between the flames and the house! Clara ran for the pump, started filling buckets, passing them to a chain of men working in frantic coordination. The heat was intense even from a distance, smoke stinging her eyes and choking her lungs. She could see Garrett and Boone digging a trench, throwing dirt on the advancing flames. Tommy was on the barn roof, dumping water across the shingles. The fire crept closer, a living thing that seemed to sense their fear and feed on it. Clara's arms burned from hauling water. Her dress was soaked with sweat and ash. But she kept moving, kept filling buckets, passing them along, trying not to think about what would happen if the flames reached the barn, the house, the bunkhouse full of everything these men owned. Hale appeared beside her, took the bucket from her hands. Get to safety. If this gets out of control, I'm not leaving. Clara, I said I'm not leaving. He looked at her, soot-streaked face illuminated by firelight, and something passed between them that didn't need words. Then he nodded and went back to fighting the flames. It took 3 hours. 3 hours of backbreaking work, of beating back fire with water and dirt, and sheer stubborn refusal to let it win. By the time the last embers were stamped out, the men were swaying on their feet, faces blackened, hands blistered. But the ranch still stood. The damage was contained to the grass between the road and the property, a 50-yard stretch of charred earth that would have reached the buildings if they'd been 5 minutes slower. Deliberate, calculated. A message from Crow that couldn't be misunderstood. Porter stood at the edge of the burned area, staring at it with hollow eyes. This is what he did to Marcus's place the night before he took it. Burned the grazing land, claimed it was an accident from a lightning strike, but there wasn't a cloud in the sky that day. You think he'll do it again tonight? Garrett asked, voice hoarse from smoke. I think he'll do whatever it takes to make sure we don't get to that meeting tomorrow. Hale wiped ash from his face with an equally dirty hand. We post triple watches, everyone armed. Anything moves near this ranch, we challenge it. The men nodded, too tired to speak. They divided up shifts, checked weapons, settled into a defensive posture that would last until dawn. Clara made coffee, gallons of it, strong enough to strip paint. She brought it around to each man standing watch, along with whatever food she could scrape together from the kitchen. They took it gratefully, barely speaking, saving their energy for the long night ahead. She found Hale near the barn, rifle across his knees, staring at the burned grass like he could make sense of it through force of will. You should sleep, he said without looking at her. So should you. Can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see this place burning. Clara sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The night was cool despite the recent fire, and she pulled her shawl tighter. We're still here. The buildings are still standing. For now. But he's not done. This was just the opening move. Then we're ready for the next one. He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight his face was all sharp angles and exhaustion. You should have left when I told you to. Should have found someplace safe. There is no safe. Not really. Crow's got reach across half the county. Running just means waiting for him to find me somewhere else. She met his eyes. At least here I'm fighting back. That what this is to you? A fight? Isn't it? Hale was quiet for a moment, choosing his words. Started out that way, maybe. But somewhere along the line it became about more than just the ranch. About more than proving Crow wrong. He paused. About not wanting to lose you. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Clara's breath caught. She'd known, on some level, that something was building between them. Had felt it in the way he looked at her, the careful distance he maintained like he was afraid of stepping too close. But hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that felt both terrifying and right. Ethan, you don't have to say anything. I wanted you to know. In case tomorrow doesn't go the way we hope. In case this is our last chance to say things that matter. Clara reached over, took his hand. His fingers were rough, calloused from work, and they closed around hers like he'd been waiting for permission to hold on. We're going to be all right, both of us. This ranch, all of it. You can't know that. No, but I can choose to believe it.
She squeezed his hand. And I'm choosing to believe that tomorrow we walk into that town hall, we show everyone what Crow really is, and enough people find the courage to stand with us. I'm choosing to believe that fighting matters, even against bad odds. Why?
Because the alternative is giving up, and I'm done with that. She looked at him, really looked, and let herself feel everything she'd been pushing down for weeks. The fear, yes, but also the hope, the connection, the sense that maybe, despite everything, she'd found something worth keeping. I'm done running from things that scare me, including this. She didn't specify what this was, but from the way his eyes widened slightly, the way his grip tightened on her hand, she knew he understood. Clara, He stopped, seemed to struggle with words that wouldn't come. Then he did something that bypassed words entirely. He leaned in, slow enough that she could pull away if she wanted, and kissed her. It was brief, careful, a question more than a statement. His lips were chapped from wind and work, and he tasted like smoke and coffee and something that made her chest ache. When he pulled back, his eyes searched her face like he was afraid he'd crossed a line. Clara answered by kissing him back, harder this time, with all the fear and fury and stubborn hope she'd been carrying. His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone, and for a moment the world narrowed to just this, the warmth of him, the solidness, the feeling of being anchored to something real. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara rested her forehead against his. That was either the smartest thing we've done or the stupidest. Probably stupid. His voice was rough. Terrible timing. The worst. But I'm not sorry. Me neither. They sat like that, hands clasped, foreheads touching, while the night settled around them and watchfires burned in the distance. Tomorrow they'd face Crow and the town, and whatever consequences came from standing their ground. But tonight, for just a few stolen moments, they had this, each other. A fragile thing built on trust and shared stubbornness, and the kind of connection that didn't come along often enough to waste. Eventually, they separated, both knowing that sitting too long would make the parting harder. Hale walked Clara back to the cookhouse, rifle still in hand, eyes scanning the darkness for threats. At her door, he paused. Get some sleep. Real sleep, not just lying there thinking. I'll try. You too. Yeah. He didn't move for a moment, like there was more he wanted to say. Then he just nodded and stepped back. See you at breakfast. See you then. Clara went inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. Her lips still tingled. Her hand still felt warm where he'd held it. And despite everything, despite the fire and the threats, and the impossible fight they were walking into tomorrow, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt alive. What? Dawn came too soon and not soon enough. Clara woke to gray light and the knowledge that today would decide everything. She dressed carefully, choosing her best dress, practical but clean, mended but respectable. She wanted to look like someone who deserved to be heard, not someone the town could dismiss. Breakfast was a quiet affair. The men ate mechanically, fueling up for what was ahead. Hale sat at the end of the table, face composed but tension visible in his shoulders. Their eyes met once across the room, and something passed between them that steadied Clara's nerves. By mid-afternoon, wagons started arriving. The foreclosed ranchers bringing their families this time. Supporters from the farms they'd visited, looking nervous but determined. Mrs. Patterson came with her sons, all three of them tall and broad-shouldered, the kind of presence that made a statement just by existing. They gathered in the yard, maybe 40 people total. Not the army Clara had hoped for, but more than they'd had before. Hale addressed them briefly, thanking them for coming, outlining what would happen at the meeting. Then they loaded into wagons and headed for town. The ride felt too short and too long. Clara sat beside Tommy, watching the burned grass give way to open road, then to the outskirts of Copper Hollow. The town looked normal, people going about their business, shops open, life continuing like nothing was about to change. But Clara could feel the tension underneath, the awareness that something was building. They reached the town hall to find it already filling. Word had spread, apparently. Half the town was there, packed into the space, curious or concerned or just hoping for entertainment. Clara recognized faces. Merchants, farmers, the school teacher, the doctor. Mrs. Hadley sat in her usual front row spot, face set in disapproving lines. But there were others too. People Clara had spoken with, people who'd seen the evidence, heard the stories. They didn't look friendly exactly, but they looked willing to listen, and that was something. The foreclosed ranchers filed in, taking up position near the front. Clara stood to the side with the ranch hands, close enough to support, but trying not to draw attention. This needed to be about the evidence, not about her.
Hale moved to the podium, and the murmuring died down. He looked out at the crowd, and Clara could see him taking strength from the faces that met his gaze without judgment. "Thank you all for coming," he started. "I know most of you have heard some version of my situation with Victor Crow. Tonight I want to show you the full picture. Not just my story, but the pattern that's been happening across this county for years."
He gestured to Jack Porter, who stood and told his story, then Walter Briggs, then Marcus Chen. Each man laid out the same pattern: the loan, the circumstances that made repayment difficult, the sudden acceleration of debt, the foreclosure. By the third telling, people in the crowd were shifting uncomfortably, exchanging looks. When the last rancher finished, Hale pulled out the contracts. "These are the agreements each man signed. Different dates, different amounts. But look at the language. Clause 17 in each one, identical wording that allows the lender to change terms under vague circumstances. Clause 23, acceleration rights that can be triggered at the lender's discretion. These aren't standard lending terms. These are traps. You signed them," someone called from the back. Clara didn't see who, but the voice was hostile. "That's on you." "You're right. We signed them. But how many of you have actually read every line of every contract you've signed? Every mortgage, every loan, every business agreement?" Hale's voice carried across the room. "Crow counts on people trusting him. He offers money when you're desperate, makes it seem straightforward, and buries the traps where you won't see them until it's too late." Mrs. Patterson stood, her voice cutting through the murmurs. "I have a loan with Crow's bank. After hearing these stories, I asked to see my full contract. They gave me a 2-page summary, but when I insisted on the complete document, they delayed, made excuses. Finally gave me 30 pages of dense legal language I can barely understand. But I found the same clauses these men are talking about, the same traps." Other voices joined in: a shopkeeper who'd borrowed to expand his store, a farmer who'd needed equipment financing, each one confirming the pattern, adding their own concerns. The tide was shifting. Clara could feel it, the way the room's energy changed from skeptical to thoughtful, from dismissive to engaged. They were listening, really listening. Then the door opened and Victor Crow walked in. He wasn't alone this time. Behind him came 6 men, well-dressed, official-looking. One of them Clara recognized as Judge Blackwell, who handled most legal matters in the county. The others were probably lawyers, clerks, people whose very presence screamed authority and legitimacy. Crow didn't rush to the front. He simply stood at the back, letting his presence register, letting the town remember who held the real power. Then he spoke, voice calm and reasonable. "This is quite a gathering. I appreciate the passion, truly. But I think we're getting carried away with conspiracy theories when the truth is much simpler." He gestured to Judge Blackwell. "These contracts were reviewed by legal counsel before being offered. They comply with all territorial lending regulations. If these men failed to read the documents they signed, that's unfortunate, but it's not fraud." "It's predatory lending," Clara said, the words escaping before she could stop them. Every eye turned to her. "You deliberately target people in desperate circumstances, offer them lifelines with poison built in, and then act surprised when the poison works." Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Whitlock, still fighting battles that aren't yours to fight," he addressed the crowd. For those who don't know, this woman has been living at Ridgeback Ranch for barely 2 months, working closely with Mr. Hale. Very closely, according to some accounts. One might question whether her vigorous defense of him stems from professional concern or personal entanglement. The implication was clear, ugly, designed to undermine everything Clara said by making people question her motives. She felt heat crawl up her neck but refused to look away. "My relationship with Mr. Hale is professional," she said clearly. "I'm the cook, but even if it were personal, that wouldn't change the facts. 6 ranchers, all foreclosed using the same tactics. That's not coincidence, that's a pattern. A pattern of poor financial planning," Crow countered. "I'm a businessman. I extend credit to people who need it, and I expect repayment according to the terms they agreed to. If those terms sometimes work in my favor when circumstances change, well, That's the nature of contracts. It's the nature of stealing, Porter said, standing. You changed my payment deadline without notice. I exercise my contractual right to amend terms based on default risk. All legal.
Legal doesn't mean right. Marcus Chen's voice shook with anger. You took my family's land using technicalities and lawyer tricks. My father built that ranch from nothing, and you took it because you could, not because you had to. The room erupted in voices, people arguing, defending, questioning. Crow stood calm in the center of it, unbothered, while Judge Blackwell nodded along like this confirmed everything he'd already believed. Hale raised his voice over the chaos.
We're not asking for sympathy. We're asking for accountability. An independent review of these contracts by someone not connected to Crow's interests. A chance to prove what we're saying is true. And I'm happy to provide that. Crow pulled papers from his jacket, handed them to the judge. Full documentation of every foreclosure mentioned tonight. All properly executed, all legally sound. Judge Blackwell has reviewed them personally. Perhaps he should share his findings. Judge Blackwell stepped forward, put on spectacles, made a show of examining the documents. I've reviewed these contracts thoroughly. They are, as Mr. Crow states, fully compliant with territorial law. The terms were clear, the amendments properly filed. While I understand these gentlemen are upset about losing their property, the law is on Mr. Crow's side.
Clara's heart sank.
This was the play she should have anticipated. Crow hadn't come to defend himself. He'd come with legal validation, with the weight of official approval, to crush their argument before it could take root. But then Mrs. Patterson stood again, and her voice carried a steel Clara hadn't heard before. Judge Blackwell, you sit on the board of Crow's bank. Isn't that right? The judge blinked, surprised. I serve in an advisory capacity, yes, but that doesn't affect my legal judgment.
And your daughter married Crow's nephew last year. What are you implying?
I'm implying that maybe an independent review means someone who doesn't have financial and family ties to the man being reviewed. Mrs. Patterson looked around the room. I may not understand all the legal language, but I understand conflict of interest, and I'm not comfortable taking the word of a judge who profits when Crow profits.
Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Crow's calm facade cracked slightly, irritation flashing across his face before he controlled it.
This is ridiculous. Judge Blackwell is a respected member of this community. So were the men whose ranches you took. Clara stepped forward, pulse pounding but voice steady. You came here with your lawyers and your judge to make this look official. But all you're really doing is proving our point. You've got so much power, so many connections, that you think you're above accountability. But you're not. Not if enough people are willing to stand up and say so.
And what exactly do you propose, Mrs. Whitlock? A lynch mob, vigilante justice? Crow's voice dripped with condescension.
Because that's what this is starting to sound like. A group of failures trying to tear down a successful man because they can't accept their own shortcomings. I propose transparency, Clara said. Open your books. Show the town every foreclosure you've executed in the past 5 years. Let people see the pattern. If you're as legitimate as you claim, you should have nothing to hide. The crowd's attention swung back to Crow, waiting for his response. He smiled, but there was something dangerous in it now. I'm a private businessman. My financial records are confidential. Convenient. It's called property rights, something you seem to have little respect for given your willingness to insert yourself into other people's affairs. He turned to address the room. I've been patient with this circus. I've brought documentation, legal review, everything required to prove my actions are lawful. If this community chooses to believe conspiracy theories over facts, that's your choice. But it doesn't change reality. Mr. Hale's ranch becomes mine in 2 days. These other men's foreclosures are final, and no amount of dramatic speeches will alter those facts. He started to leave, his entourage following, but then Hale spoke, voice cutting through the noise. You're right. Legal facts probably won't change. But there's another kind of fact you're forgetting. This town exists because people choose to do business here, choose to work together, support each other. And if enough people decide they don't want to support a man who profits from others' suffering, that changes things. Maybe not legally, but practically. Crow stopped, turned back. Are you threatening to organize a boycott, Ethan? Because that would be unfortunate for everyone. I'm saying people have choices, and once they know the truth, they might make different ones than you'd like.
The two men stared at each other across the crowded room, and Clara could feel the weight of everything unsaid. This wasn't just about contracts anymore. It was about power, about whether one man could control an entire community through fear and financial leverage, or whether enough people could find the courage to say no. The moment stretched, taut as wire. Then Crow smiled, cold and certain.
We'll see. He looked directly at Clara. We'll see how brave people are when it costs them something. He left, the judge and lawyers trailing behind, and the room exhaled as one. The crowd broke into small groups, arguing, debating, processing. Clara couldn't tell if they'd won anything or just made Crow angry enough to escalate further. Hale found her in the chaos, pulled her aside. That wasn't the victory we needed. No, but it wasn't a loss either. People are talking, questioning. That's something. It's not enough to save the ranch. Clara looked at him, saw the exhaustion and acceptance in his face, and felt her heart crack. Maybe not, but we tried. We told the truth, and some people heard it. That has to count for something.
Yeah. He touched her face briefly, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. It does. And Clara, whatever happens tomorrow, thank you. For fighting, for staying, for making me believe it was possible.
They loaded back into wagons as darkness fell, the crowd dispersing in small groups, still talking, still processing. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, everyone too drained for conversation. Clara watched the stars come out and tried to prepare herself for the likelihood that in 48 hours this place would belong to Victor Crow and she'd be looking for work again. They were halfway home when they saw the glow on the horizon. Orange light, too bright and too steady to be anything but fire, coming from the direction of the ranch. No, Hale breathed. Then louder. Faster! Move! The wagon surged forward, horses pushed to their limit. Clara gripped the seat, heart in her throat, watching that terrible glow grow brighter. Please, she thought. Please let it be the grass again. Please don't let it be the buildings. But as they crested the final hill, the full scope of the disaster became clear. The barn was engulfed, flames reaching into the night sky like grasping hands. Smoke billowed thick and black, and even from a distance, Clara could hear the terrible sound of wood cracking, collapsing. The barn where they stored hay for winter, where the tools were kept, the spare tack, everything needed to run the ranch, the barn that had stood for 20 years. It was burning, and from the size of the blaze, there would be nothing left to save. Hale was off the wagon before it stopped moving, sprinting toward the inferno. Clara followed, her dress catching on the wagon edge, ripping free as she ran. Heat hit her like a wall 30 yards out, pushing back, warning her this was too big to fight. But that didn't stop her from trying. The ranch hands were already there, hauling water in a desperate chain that couldn't possibly be enough. The barn roof caved with a sound like thunder, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. Horses screamed from the corral. Someone had gotten them out, thank everything. But the cattle were panicking, crashing against fences. "The house!" Tommy shouted, pointing. Embers were landing on the main house roof, on the bunkhouse. Small fires starting, spreading. Clara changed direction, grabbed a bucket, started dousing the flames before they could take hold. Around her was chaos. Men shouting, wood cracking, the roar of fire consuming everything it touched. Somewhere in the madness, she heard Hale's voice, hoarse from smoke, directing people, trying to save what could be saved. The barn was lost. They knew it within minutes. But they fought anyway, focused on keeping the fire from jumping to the other buildings. Fought until their hands blistered and their lungs burned and their legs shook from exhaustion. Fought until the barn collapsed completely, sending up a column of sparks and ash that painted the sky orange. And then finally, when there was nothing left to fight, they stopped. Stood in the yard covered in soot and sweat, watching the remains burn down to embers. The barn was gone. 20 years of history, reduced to charred timber and twisted metal. The hay stores for winter, the tools, the equipment they couldn't afford to replace. All of it, gone. Clara found Hale standing at the edge of the wreckage, staring at the destruction like if he looked long enough he could make sense of it. His face was streaked with ash, his eyes hollow. She moved beside him, didn't speak. What was there to say? "They were watching the road," he said finally, voice dead. "We had men posted. They must have come from the back through the hills." "Crow's men." Of course it was Crow's men. Who else? He laughed, bitter and broken. "We went to that meeting, told the truth, and this is what we get. Proof that fighting back just makes things worse. Clara wanted to argue, but the words stuck in her throat. Because maybe he was right. Maybe all they'd accomplished was making Crow angry enough to destroy them completely. The foreclosed ranchers approached, faces grim. Porter spoke for them all. "This is my fault. I pushed for the meeting. Should have known Crow would retaliate." "It's not your fault," Hale said. "It's mine. I should have sent Clara away when I had the chance. Should have sent all of you away. This ranch was already lost. No reason to burn it down, too." "It wasn't lost until it burned." Tommy's voice was angry. "We could have kept working it, kept trying. For what? 2 more days before Crow took it anyway?" Hale turned away from the wreckage. "It's over. Tell the men they can take what they can carry. Rest is Crow's problem now." He walked toward the house, shoulders bowed under weight. Clara couldn't begin to measure. She started to follow, but Porter caught her arm. "Don't let him give up. Not now." "He just lost everything." "So did I. So did all of us. Difference is he's still got a chance to fight. Barn's gone, but the land's still here. The house is still standing. That's more than nothing. It's not enough to save the ranch. Crow gets it in 2 days regardless." "Maybe. Maybe not." Porter looked at the other foreclosed ranchers, something passing between them. "We've been talking about what we'd do if we got a second chance, about what it means to stand up to someone like Crow even when you know you'll lose." "Where are you going with this?" "We're going to buy you time. All of us. We're going to make Crow's life difficult enough that maybe, just maybe, he decides this particular piece of land isn't worth the trouble." Clara stared at him. "How?" "By doing what he did to us. Not illegal, mind you, but not quiet either. We're going to file complaints, request audits, ask questions in every public forum we can find. We're going to make noise until people have to pay attention." "That won't stop the foreclosure." "No, but it might slow it down. And if we can slow it down long enough..." He shrugged. "Who knows? Maybe something changes." It was a thin hope, barely more than a wish. But it was something. And right now, something was more than they'd had 5 minutes ago. "Thank you," Clara said, meaning it. "Thank us by not giving up. By making sure Hale doesn't give up either." Porter squeezed her shoulder. "You're good for him, you know. He's been alone too long, carrying this by himself. You showed him he doesn't have to." The words settled into Clara's chest, warm despite everything. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and headed for the house. She found Hale in the main room, sitting at the table with papers spread in front of him. Not looking at them, just staring at the surface like answers might appear in the wood grain. "The men want to know what to do," Clara said quietly. "Tell them to pack up. They've got until morning, then they're on their own." "And you?" "I'll stay until Crow shows up to claim it. Make sure everything's in order. Then I'll figure out what comes next." Clara pulled out a chair, sat across from him. "You're just going to hand it over?" "What choice do I have? The barn's gone. Even if I could somehow pay Crow, I don't have the resources to rebuild. Ranch can't function without that barn." "So we rebuild it." "With what money? What materials? What time?" His voice cracked. "Clara, it's done. I fought as hard as I could, but some things can't be won. This is one of them." She reached across the table, took his hand. It was rough, blistered from fighting the fire, and it trembled slightly in her grasp. "You told me once that some fights are worth having whether you win or not. That's still true?" "I don't know anymore. Seems like all we did was make things worse." "No. We made things clear. We showed people who Crow really is. That matters." "Does it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, Crow's still got all the power, and we've got ashes." Clara understood the despair. She'd felt it herself after Daniel died, that crushing certainty that fighting was pointless because the ending was already written. But she'd also learned something in the months since then, something she hadn't fully realized until this moment. "You know what I thought when I came here?" she said. "I thought I was just surviving, finding work so I wouldn't starve, going through motions because that's what you do when you've got nothing left. But that's not what this place became. You gave me something worth fighting for, not just a job, but a home. People who cared. A reason to wake up that wasn't just, might as well." She squeezed his hand, held his gaze. "Maybe we lose this ranch. Maybe Crow takes it, and there's nothing we can do. But we fought for it. We stood up when it would have been easier to lie down. And that's not nothing. That's everything." Hale's eyes were bright, suspiciously so. "You're better at this than me. The hope thing. I've had more practice losing. Makes you either bitter or stubborn. I chose stubborn. A ghost of a smile touched his face, then it faded, replaced by something more serious. If we lose this place, if we have to leave, come with me. Clara's heart stuttered.
What? I'm not good at this. At saying what I mean. But you asked me once why I was fighting, what I had worth saving, and the answer was this ranch. But that's not true anymore. The answer's you. He turned his hand over, laced his fingers through hers. So if I have to walk away from here, I want you with me. Not as the cook, as my partner. In whatever comes next.
The words hit Clara like a physical force. She'd known something was building between them, had felt it in every look and touch and shared moment. But hearing him say it plainly, without pretense or protection, made it real in a way that terrified and thrilled her equally. Ethan, you don't have to answer now. I just needed you to know. Before tomorrow, before everything falls apart, I needed you to know that you matter. To me. More than the land, more than the fight. You. Clara felt tears threatening, hot and unwelcome. She'd spent months building walls, protecting herself from wanting anything she could lose. And here was this man offering her exactly what she was most afraid of. Connection, partnership, a future that wasn't just survival. Yes, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Yes? Yes. If we lose this place, if we have to leave, I'll come with you, wherever that is. He stood, pulled her up with him, and kissed her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone to ash. Clara wrapped her arms around him, held on, and let herself believe that maybe, despite everything, they'd found something worth keeping. The moment was shattered by shouting outside. They broke apart, moved to the window, riders approaching, at least a dozen, carrying torches. Clara's stomach dropped. Crow's men, Hale said, reaching for his rifle. Come to finish what they started. But as the riders got closer, Clara recognized faces. Mrs. Patterson's sons leading the group. Behind them, the blacksmith, the shopkeeper, farmers and townspeople Clara had spoken with over the past days, not coming to attack, coming to help. They dismounted in the yard, surveying the destruction. Mrs. Patterson herself climbed down from a wagon loaded with lumber. We saw the smoke from town, she said. Figured Crow would pull something like this after the meeting, so we grabbed what we could and came. Came for what? Hale asked, stepping onto the porch. To rebuild. She gestured to the wagon, to the men behind her. Can't let him win by burning you out. That's not how things should work. I can't pay you. We're not asking for a payment. We're asking for a chance to prove that Copper Hollow's better than Victor Crow. That we take care of our own, even when it's hard. Mrs. Patterson's voice carried across the yard. You stood up at that meeting and told the truth. Some of us heard it. Time we stood up too. More wagons arrived through the night, bringing supplies, tools, willing hands. People Clara barely knew, showing up to help rebuild what Crow had destroyed. By dawn, they had the remains of the barn cleared and lumber laid out for a new frame. It wouldn't be as large as the original, wouldn't have all the features they'd lost, but it would be functional. Enough to keep the ranch running. Haley stood in the center of the activity, looking lost and grateful in equal measure. Clara brought him coffee, watched him take in the sight of his neighbors working together without being asked. I don't understand, he said. Yesterday, half these people thought I was making trouble. Now they're here. You showed them what Crow really is, and burning your barn just confirmed it. Clara leaned against him, shoulder to shoulder. Turns out people will tolerate a lot, but destroying someone's livelihood out of spite crosses a line. By midday, the barn's frame was rising. It wasn't perfect. The boards didn't quite match. The angles were slightly off where inexperienced hands did the measuring. But it was real. Solid. A defiant middle finger to the idea that burning things down meant winning. Tommy worked alongside Mrs. Patterson's sons, hammering with more enthusiasm than skill. Boone directed the effort despite his healing arm, shouting instructions in between breaks to rest. Even the foreclosed ranchers pitched in, their presence a statement that this fight wasn't just about Hale anymore. It was about all of them. Clara cooked. She took over the cookhouse, turned it into a feeding station for the workers, producing stew and bread and coffee in quantities that strained her supplies but kept everyone going. People cycled through, eating quickly, thanking her with nods and tired smiles before heading back to work. Around 3 in the afternoon, a sheriff's deputy appeared on the road, watched the construction for a few minutes, then rode on without saying anything. Clara's stomach tightened. That was a message. Crow knew what they were doing. "Think he'll try to stop us?" Tommy asked, following her gaze. "I think he's deciding if it's worth the trouble. Burning a barn in the night is one thing. Stopping a whole community in broad daylight is different. What if he comes anyway? Then we deal with it." She said it with more confidence than she felt. Because the truth was, Crow still held all the legal cards. In less than 2 days, the ranch would be his regardless of what barn stood on it. They were buying time, making a statement, but they weren't changing the fundamental reality, unless they could find a way to change it. Clara was washing dishes when the idea hit her. She stood frozen, hands in soapy water, thinking it through. It was risky, possibly illegal. Definitely the kind of thing that would make Crow furious. But if it worked, she dried her hands, found Hale checking the barn's foundation with one of Mrs. Patterson's sons. "I need to talk to you, privately." He followed her away from the construction, concern on his face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Maybe something right." She kept her voice low. "The foreclosures. All of them use the same clauses, the same language. That means Crow's using a template, a standard contract he applies to everyone." So if there's something wrong with that template, if there's a legal flaw, it might invalidate all the foreclosures, not just yours, but all of them. Hale frowned. Judge Blackwell already said the contracts are legal. Judge Blackwell is in Crow's pocket, but there's a territorial court 2 counties over. They handle appeals, contract disputes, cases where local judges might have conflicts of interest. Clara's words came faster, excitement building. "If we could file an appeal, get the contracts reviewed by someone who doesn't benefit from Crow winning, we'd need a lawyer, money for filing fees, and we'd need grounds for appeal beyond we think it's unfair. What about the amendments? The changes Crow made without proper notice? That's got to violate some kind of requirement for contract modifications." "Maybe, but I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what counts as proper notice in territorial law." Clara bit her lip, thinking. Then it clicked. Sullivan, the banker. He said Crow had forged documents to make it look like he was embezzling. That means Crow's willing to commit fraud to get what he wants. What if we could prove he forged the amendments, backdated them to make it look like they were filed properly when they weren't? That's a big what if. It's the only what if we've got. She grabbed his arm. "Ethan, we're building a barn. That's good. That's important. But it doesn't change the legal reality. If we're going to actually win this, we need to attack the contracts themselves, find the flaw, and rip the whole thing apart." He studied her, and she could see him weighing it, the risk against the possibility, the energy it would take against the time they had left. Then he nodded, slowly. "All right, but we need someone who knows territorial contract law, and we need them fast." "I might know someone," Mrs. Patterson said from behind them. They turned, surprised. She shrugged. "Wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I've got good ears. My brother's a lawyer in Silver Creek. Handles mining claims mostly, but he knows territorial law. I can send a writer." "We can't afford—" "I'm not asking what you can afford. I'm asking if you want help." She crossed her arms. "My husband and I have that loan with Crow. If there's even a chance these contracts aren't legal, I want to know. So do half the people here. You're not just fighting for yourself anymore." The realization settled over Clara like dawn. This had stopped being about one ranch, one man's struggle. It had become something larger, a whole community pushing back against someone who'd controlled them through fear and fine print for too long. "Send the writer," Hale said. "Tell your brother we need him here tomorrow if possible. We'll pay whatever he asks. He'll come tonight if I ask right. He owes me for covering his gambling debts." Mrs. Patterson allowed herself a small smile. "Let me handle it." She strode off, already calling for someone to saddle a fast horse. Clara looked at Hale, saw hope fighting with exhaustion in his face. "This could still fail," he warned. "Could. But at least we're trying." The barn went up faster than Clara thought possible. By sunset, the frame was complete and they were starting on walls. It wouldn't be finished tonight, but the bones were there, strong and true despite the rushed construction. People worked by firelight as darkness fell, refusing to quit, driven by something that went beyond helping one rancher. They were proving something to themselves, that they weren't helpless, that collective action mattered. Crow must have heard what was happening, because shortly after dark 3 of his men rode up. not the ones who'd burned the barn. These were his official employees, recognizable from the bank and his business office. They stopped at the property line, watching the construction but not interfering. Hale walked out to meet them, Clara beside him. The lead man, a thin fellow with spectacles and a nervous disposition, cleared his throat. Mr. Crow asked me to remind you that in 2 days this property transfers to him. Any improvements made now become his property as well. I'm aware of the terms, Hale said evenly. He also wants it clear that any damage to existing structures, by which he means the barn that burned, will be considered destruction of assets and could result in additional penalties. Barn burned down before the transfer. Not my fault it happened. Mr. Crow has evidence suggesting otherwise. Clara stepped forward before Hale could respond. Evidence he created, you mean? Forged, just like he forged contract amendments. Just like he'll forge whatever he needs to take what he wants. The man's eyes flickered. Just for a second, something like discomfort crossed his face. I'm just delivering a message. Then here's one to take back, Hale said. Tell Crow he can have this ranch when the law says he can, not a minute before. And tell him we're not going quietly. Every questionable clause, every suspicious amendment, every foreclosure that followed the same pattern, we're bringing it all into the light. He might win, but we're going to make sure everyone knows what it cost. The men rode off without another word. Clara watched them go, adrenaline singing through her veins. They'd just drawn a line, made it clear they were fighting to the end. The only question was whether the end would come in 2 days or whether they could somehow push it further. Mrs. Patterson's brother arrived 3 hours later, riding hard, looking annoyed and curious in equal measure. His name was James Whitfield, and he had the sharp eyes of someone who read contracts for breakfast and noticed what others missed. They gathered in the main house, Hale, Clara, the foreclosed ranchers, Mrs. Patterson, and Whitfield. Spread the contracts across the table, along with every piece of correspondence, every amendment, every document they'd collected. Whitfield read in silence for 20 minutes, occasionally making notes. When he finally looked up, his expression was carefully neutral. These contracts are problematic. Not illegal on their face, but the amendments— He tapped one of the documents. Territorial law requires 30 days written notice for any material changes to lending agreements. These amendments show filing dates with the county, but there's no evidence notice was actually sent to the borrowers. That's a violation. Can we prove it? Porter asked. We'd need to show that Crow filed the amendments but failed to provide proper notice. If we can demonstrate that pattern across multiple foreclosures, we might have grounds for appeal. Might? Hale's voice was flat. Contract law is complicated. Crow clearly has lawyers who structured these to walk the line between legal and exploitative. But the notice issue is legitimate. If I file an emergency appeal with the territorial court, citing improper amendment procedures, and requesting a stay on all pending foreclosures until the matter is reviewed— Whitfield paused. It won't be fast, but it might be fast enough. How fast? Clara asked. The court could grant a temporary stay within a week. Full hearing might take months. We've got 2 days. Then I'll file tomorrow morning and request an expedited review based on imminent harm. Judges don't like being rushed, but if I argue that multiple foreclosures are proceeding without proper due process, they might listen. It wasn't a guarantee, it was barely a chance, but it was more than they'd had an hour ago. They worked through the night, Whitfield preparing documents while the others provided testimony, dates, evidence of when they'd learned about the amendments versus when they were supposedly filed. Claire made coffee, kept everyone fed, and tried not to calculate the odds of this actually working. By dawn, Whitfield had a case. Thin, built on technicalities and untested legal theories, but a case nonetheless. He rode out at first light, heading for the territorial courthouse, with papers that might save 6 ranches, or might just be expensive noise. The barn was finished by mid-morning. Rough, simple, but functional. People stood back, surveying their work with tired satisfaction. It wasn't the barn Hale had lost, but it was proof that burning things down didn't mean winning. Not if people refused to stay burned. Crow must have been watching because he appeared shortly after noon, riding up with his usual entourage but stopping short of the property line. He surveyed the new barn, the gathered townspeople, the defiant faces staring back at him. Impressive, he called out. Though ultimately pointless. This land becomes mine tomorrow. That barn along with it. Maybe, Hale called back, or maybe not. There's no maybe. I have a contract, That's being reviewed by the territorial court. Emergency appeal filed this morning requesting a stay on all foreclosures pending investigation into improper amendment procedures. Hale stepped forward, and Clara saw him standing taller than he had in days. You might still win, Crow, but you're going to have to prove those contracts are legitimate in front of a judge who doesn't work for you. Crow's expression went cold. You're delaying the inevitable, wasting everyone's time. We're demanding due process. There's a difference. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the distance. Then Crow smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Clara had seen yet. You want due process? Fine. I'll bury you in it. Motions, depositions, legal fees that'll bankrupt you before the hearing even happens. You think you're fighting for your ranch? You're fighting for the right to be destroyed more slowly. Better slowly than quietly. Crow wheeled his horse, started to leave, then turned back. His eyes found Clara, and the hatred there was pure and simple. This is your doing, your influence. He would have given up weeks ago if you hadn't filled his head with foolish hope. Hope's not foolish, Clara said. Thinking you can control people through fear forever, that's foolish. We'll see. When you're both homeless and unemployed, we'll revisit that theory. He rode off, and the gathered townspeople watched him go. Some looked worried, processing the threat of prolonged legal warfare. Others looked determined, like Crow's anger just confirmed they were doing the right thing. Mrs. Patterson touched Clara's shoulder. He's scared. I've known men like him my whole life. They don't get angry like that unless they're worried they might actually lose. He's still got all the advantages. Not all of them. He's got money and connections. We've got numbers and stubbornness. Sometimes that's enough. The townspeople dispersed slowly, heading home with promises to return if needed. The foreclosed ranchers stayed, unwilling to leave until they knew the outcome. The ranch hands went back to work, settling into routines that felt almost normal despite everything. Clara found herself in the cookhouse as the sun set, preparing dinner for a group that had become something like family. Tommy helped without being asked, chopping vegetables while she worked on bread. They moved in comfortable silence, the kind that came from shared purpose and shared exhaustion. You think we'll actually win this? Tommy asked eventually. I think we'll fight until there's nothing left to fight for. After that, who knows? That's not really an answer. It's the only answer I've got. Clara shaped dough, let her hands work while her mind wandered. But here's what I know. A month ago, I came here with nothing. No home, no hope, just desperation and a bag of clothes. This place gave me something worth fighting for, gave me people I care about. So even if we lose the ranch, I didn't lose that. Nobody can take that away. Tommy was quiet for a moment. You and Hale. That's real, isn't it? Not just the town gossip version. Clara felt heat creep up her neck. It's real. Good. He deserves someone who doesn't give up on him. Tommy grinned. Even if she's stubborn enough to drive a man crazy. Takes one to know one. They finished cooking, called everyone for dinner. The group gathered around the long table in a scene that felt achingly normal. People passing food, sharing conversation, existing together in a moment of peace stolen from the chaos. Hale sat at the head of the table, Clara beside him, and when their hands touched briefly, it felt like a promise. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The next day crawled by. Everyone tried to work, maintain normalcy, but tension hummed underneath everything. The territorial court hadn't responded to Whitfield's filing. Crow hadn't made another move. It was the quiet before something broke, and nobody knew which direction the break would come from. Clara was feeding chickens when she saw riders approaching in the late afternoon. Her heart jumped, more of Crow's men probably. But as they got closer, she recognized Whitfield's distinctive lean frame. She ran for the house, calling for Hale. By the time they gathered in the yard, Whitfield was dismounting, his face unreadable. The court granted a temporary stay, he said without preamble. Pending full review, all foreclosures based on Crow's standard contract template are suspended. That means you, he pointed at Hale, keep this ranch, and you, and you, indicating the foreclosed ranchers. Get your cases reopened. Silence. Then everyone started talking at once, questions tumbling over each other. Whitfield raised his hands. This isn't a victory, it's a delay. The court wants to review the contracts, examine the amendment procedures, determine if Crow's practices constitute predatory lending. Full hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks from now, but until then, the ranch is yours. Hale looked stunned. 6 weeks? 6 weeks to build a case, gather evidence, prepare testimony, and Crow will be doing the same. He's got resources, lawyers, every advantage. This isn't over.
But it's not over today, Clara said, the realization sinking in. We bought time. More than that, you bought legitimacy. The court taking this seriously means other people will too. Crow can't just dismiss this as troublemaking anymore. He's got to defend his practices in a legal forum. Whitfield allowed himself a small smile. You actually did it. You made enough noise that the system had to pay attention. The celebration was muted, everyone too aware that this was just one battle in a longer war. But that night, sitting on the cookhouse steps watching stars come out, Clara let herself feel something close to hope. Hale found her there, sat beside her in comfortable silence before speaking. We did it. Actually did it. We bought 6 weeks. That's not the same as winning. No, but it's not losing either. He took her hand, laced their fingers together. Remember what you said about fights being worth having even if you don't win? I'm starting to understand that. Whatever happens at the hearing, we proved something, that standing up matters, that people will help if you give them a reason to believe. Clara leaned into him, let her head rest on his shoulder. So what now? Now we prepare. Build the case, get ready for the hearing, and we live. Actually live, not just survive. Sounds good to me. They sat like that as night deepened, two people who'd found each other in the middle of a fight and decided that was reason enough to keep fighting. The ranch was quiet around them, settling into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles to face. But tonight, they had this, each other. A future that wasn't guaranteed but felt possible in a way it hadn't before. The hearing, 6 weeks later, took 3 days. Whitfield presented the evidence methodically, the contracts, the amendments, testimony from each foreclosed rancher about when and how they'd learned about changed terms. He brought in a territorial contract specialist who testified that Crow's amendment procedures violated notice requirements. Built a case that was technical, detailed, and damning. Crow's lawyers argued process, precedent, the sanctity of contracts freely entered. They attacked the credibility of witnesses, questioned motivations, made it sound like a conspiracy of failures trying to avoid responsibility. And they were good, expensive, polished, the kind of legal firepower that usually won. But they couldn't explain away the pattern. 6 foreclosures, all following the same template, all with amendments filed, but no evidence of proper notice. The judge, a stern woman named Harriet Blackwood, who'd seen every trick in the book, asked pointed questions that Crow's lawyers struggled to answer. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Judge Blackwood delivered her ruling. The court finds that while the contracts themselves are not inherently illegal, the amendment procedures used by the lender demonstrate a pattern of failing to provide adequate notice as required by territorial lending regulations. This constitutes a material violation of due process and renders the amended terms unenforceable. Clara, sitting beside Hale in the crowded courtroom, gripped his hand so hard her knuckles went white. Therefore, Judge Blackwood continued, the foreclosures based on accelerated payment terms are hereby vacated. The original contract terms remain in effect, giving each borrower the full time frame initially agreed upon to satisfy their debts. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged her gavel, called for order, but Clara barely heard it. They'd won. Actually won. The ranch was safe, not just for 6 weeks, but for the 8 months Hale had been promised originally. Time to rebuild, to recover, to make the ranch profitable enough to pay off the debt. Crow sat stone-faced in the front row, jaw clenched. When the proceedings ended, he stood and walked out without a word, his lawyers scrambling to follow. Outside the courthouse, people mobbed them. The foreclosed ranchers crying and laughing and shaking Whitfield's hand so hard it looked painful. Townspeople who'd made the trip to show support, celebrating like it was their victory too. Because in a way, it was. They'd proven that the system could work if you pushed hard enough, that justice was possible even against someone with Crow's power. Mrs. Patterson hugged Clara so tight she could barely breathe. You did it. You actually did it. Whitfield did it. We just gave him the case. No. You gave us all the courage to fight. That's what mattered. The celebration continued through the evening.
Someone brought whiskey, someone else brought a fiddle, and an impromptu party broke out in the street outside the courthouse. Clara danced with Tommy, with Porter, with strangers who just wanted to share the joy. And when Hale pulled her aside into a quiet corner away from the noise, she went willingly. "Thank you," he said, simple and direct. "For what?" "For not letting me give up, for fighting when I didn't have the strength, for being stubborn and impossible and exactly what I needed." Clara smiled. "I'm still the cook, you know. You're going to have to pay me." "I'll pay you double, triple, if you stay." "I'm staying. Already told you that." She reached up, touched his face. "We're partners now. In this ranch and whatever comes next." That was the deal. Best deal I ever made. He kissed her there in the fading light, with the sounds of celebration drifting from the street and the future spreading open before them like an unwritten page. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling, breathing hard, alive in a way that went beyond simple survival. The months that followed weren't easy. The ranch still carried debt, still required backbreaking work to keep running, but it was manageable now. Hale had time to rebuild the herd, to repair what the drought had damaged, to slowly claw his way back to profitability. Crow's empire, meanwhile, began to crumble. The court case opened wounds that didn't close. Other borrowers came forward with complaints, demands for contract reviews, questions about his business practices. The territorial government launched an investigation into predatory lending across the region, using Crow's contracts as a case study in what not to do. Within a year, Crow sold most of his holdings and left the territory, his reputation destroyed, his power broken. The bank was bought by new ownership that actually cared about serving the community. Copper Hollow slowly transformed into a place where people helped each other instead of just surviving in isolation. Clara and Hale were married in the spring, a simple ceremony on the ranch with the whole community attending. She wore a dress Mrs. Patterson helped her make. He wore his best suit that still had patches on the elbows, and they exchanged vows under an open sky that promised nothing except what they made of it. The ranch prospered. Slowly, with setbacks and struggles, but it grew. They added cattle, improved the land, built a reputation for fair dealing that brought them steady business. Tommy became foreman, Boone took over training new hands, and the crew became a family bound by more than wages. And Clara, she kept cooking, kept running the kitchen, but she was more than that now. She was Hale's partner in every sense, making decisions, managing accounts, proving that the widow who'd stepped off a stagecoach with nothing had become someone who built futures instead of just surviving them. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she'd sit on the porch and think about the journey that brought her here, the loss that had driven her west, the desperation that had made her take a job from a stranger, the stubbornness that had made her stay when leaving would have been easier. She'd learned something in those hard months of fighting. That strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about getting up after you broke and deciding the fight still mattered. That courage wasn't fearlessness. It was being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. That home wasn't a place you were born, but a place you chose to defend when it would have been simpler to walk away. She'd also learned that sometimes the most important battles weren't about winning. They were about refusing to surrender. About standing up even when the odds were impossible, because standing meant something. Because the fight itself changed you into someone who could build a life worth fighting for. The ranch would always carry scars. The barn that had been rebuilt was different from the one that burned. The struggles left marks on all of them, in Hale's hands that still bore faint burn scars, in Clara's eyes that had seen too much loss not to guard what she had fiercely, in the careful way they held each other like they understood that nothing was guaranteed. But those scars were proof they'd survived, proof that breaking didn't mean staying broken, proof that sometimes the things you had to fight hardest for were the things worth keeping. On their first anniversary, Clara stood in the kitchen, her kitchen, in her home, on their land, and made biscuits the way her mother had taught her. Hale came in for coffee, kissed the back of her neck in passing, settled at the table like he'd done it 1,000 times. Tommy burst in with news about a pregnant mare. Boone followed with a question about fence repairs, and the room filled with the comfortable chaos of a working ranch. Clara looked around at the life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness, and felt something she'd thought she'd lost forever. Not just happiness, that was too simple, but contentment. The bone-deep knowledge that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what mattered, with people who'd proven they wouldn't run when things got hard. She'd come west running from loss. She'd found it anyway, found it and fought it, and somehow came out the other side with more than she'd had before. Because that was the thing about loss. It didn't define you unless you let it. And she'd decided, somewhere between the cookhouse and the town hall and the burning barn, that she was done letting fear decide what she deserved. She deserved this. The home, the partnership, the future built one stubborn day at a time. The ranch that had given her a chance when she had nothing, that had become the place she'd defend with everything she had. Ridgeback Ranch stood strong against the hills, scarred but standing, home to people who'd learned that the best things in life were worth fighting for, whether you won or not. And in the kitchen where she'd first proven herself, Clara made breakfast for her family and smiled, because sometimes the fight itself was the victory. Sometimes refusing to break was enough.